Police officers have always gotten a bad rap for their authority over us, which is very often abused. However, the police are the first ones to get called into action whenever trouble arises, and they'll no doubt see some disturbing stuff. Here are 4 haunting stories of former police officers. Number 4. I was a cop for 30 years. I retired at the age of 50, so of course I had some weird calls. But I'll never forget the night that me and my partner Steve were called to respond to a domestic abuse report. The call was made by a neighbor. These calls were never really a big deal. It usually gave us something to do during the night. Not that I enjoyed dealing with couples fighting and all that stuff. So we arrived at the house. I still vividly remember the address, and I remember the door was left wide open. The second we stepped inside, the strong scent of marijuana filled our lungs. It was everywhere. Not just marijuana though. There was the strong smell of chemicals, which we assumed was either meth or cocaine. We made our presence known by asking for the couple to come out into sight. A thump from the upstairs gave away their position. Steve had his hand on his holster, ready to pull his gun. But me? I wasn't nervous yet. Steve told me to move quietly up the stairs. We normally listen to each other, so I humored his paranoia. There were 3 doors, 2 open and 1 closed. The closed door led in the direction where the thud in the ceiling was. I banged on the door before swinging it open myself. The smell was the first thing we noticed, then the body. The body was very obviously rotted. We knew even in the dark. We pulled our guns. Steve turned on the light. I told him to scan that room while I scanned the rest of the house. I was shaking all over now. I hated my job at that moment. I wanted to run back to the car and leave, for I was sure I could die at any moment. I found my hand to be stuck on the doorknob until I finally had the balls to turn it and push the door open with force. I turned the light on, but there was nobody inside. It was a disturbingly tiny room. No windows and no furniture, except for a dirty old cot. Steve suddenly screamed, and I rushed across the hall to see what was going on. There was some shirtless guy laying flat above one of the dressers in the room. We had him at gunpoint, yelling at him to come down, when something grabbed my ankle and tried to pull me to the floor. There was a hand coming from under the bed. I stomped on the arm with my other foot and pulled out a frail, trashy-looking woman who was obviously baked. I cuffed her and Steve cuffed the man. We were on our way outside with the 2 crazies screaming at us, but we had one final surprise coming. Some psycho from upstairs started screaming, charging at us down the stairs with a knife raised in the air. Steve reacted just fast enough to save my ass by 2 seconds, shooting the guy dead. This was a crack house. Somehow none of the neighbors could smell anything suspicious. The dead woman on the bed was killed by the man of the 2 we caught, who admitted to killing her due to lack of payment. The man was sentenced to life without parole. The woman was sentenced to 30 years. Steve says he never felt bad about what he did. He says he just rid the world of one more piece of trash. Number 3. Myself and a buddy on my squad responded to an alarm. The incident location was an old office-type building that had been converted to a doctor's office. There was a pharmacy attached to it as well. Our dispatch received a motion signal from an upstairs office. The key holder arrives on the scene and we go in to secure the building. The stairs were locked behind a door that, of course, the key holder didn't have a key to, so we took the elevator up to the 2nd floor. The elevator opens to a pitch-black hallway, except for one overhead light at the end of the hall. We start checking the doors, and so far, all are secured. We get to the last office, and sure enough, the door is unlocked. We make entry and observe it to be an unused office. The door opened to a sizable waiting room and reception area. There were about 10 or 12 exam rooms, all cleared with no hiccups. We exit the office, and immediately, something seems off. That's when I realized the overhead light at our end of the hallway that was on before had been turned off. It was replaced by another light over at the elevators. I look at my squad mate and he's completely white. I ask him what's wrong, and he says, "Weren't all those doors we just checked closed and locked?" I tell him, "Yeah, so?" My buddy says, "Well, now they're all standing open." Sure enough, all the offices down the hallway we had just checked were now standing open. The pucker factor sinks in at this point, so we start clearing and securing offices. We finish the last office, and on our way out, just before we turn the corner to get into the waiting area, the main door just slams shut. Then our radios start going nuts with some kind of static feedback. Now I just want to get the hell out of there. We get back in the elevator and head down to the first floor in hopes to make contact with the key holder again. However, the key holder is nowhere to be found. I contact dispatch and request a callback number for the key holder so I can advise him of what we found. Dispatch states that the key holder was still en route to us and was advising an ETA of 5 minutes. I advised dispatch that we had already been out with the key holder. Dispatch requests I give them a call. I call dispatch, and she tells me that there is no way we were out with the key holder. She states that the alarm company had only just made contact with one. Eventually, the real key holder arrives on the scene, and I ask her about the man that had let us in the building. She asked me to describe him, so I did. She states that sounds like one of the doctors that used to lease the office on the second floor at the end of the hall. She then states that he had committed suicide at his summer home several days ago. Number 2. I was responding to a call in the village. A resident was reporting noises coming from one of the abandoned buildings from across the street, most likely trespassing. I arrived and began my search in the building. It used to be a 2-story convenience store. Now it was completely stripped empty, except for the parts attached to the floor, like the counter and shelves. The lights didn't work in there either. I checked every small aisle for anyone to possibly be hiding in, and then I did the same thing upstairs. It was completely empty. On my way back into my car, I looked back at the building and saw somebody at the window on the second floor. It was a woman with long gray hair down past her shoulders. She was no doubt looking down at me with a wide smile on her face. I hurried back inside, making it upstairs in no more than 10 seconds, but the window was clear. There was nobody in sight. I checked all 3 aisles at least 10 times. I checked behind the counter, I checked the bathroom. It was clear. I was a little nervous, so I left again, thinking my mind was fooling me. I looked back at the window, and there she was again. The same mockingly disturbing smile on her face. I went back up there again, this time running around all 3 aisles trying to find this woman. I was about to give it up once more and leave for good when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. It was on the ceiling. A dark shade of black latched onto the ceiling. I shined my light up there, and there she was. That crazed woman looked at me, still with a horrifying smile on her face as she held onto 2 hook-like objects in the ceiling with her hands, while her feet were pushed up against the tile to gain support. She laughed like a freak all the way down to the station. I don't know if she had some kind of mental disability or not. It seemed like she was just toying with me, but not at all in a good way. She stared me down through the mirror the whole ride. Number 1. In all my years of being a police officer in Floyd County, Georgia, I had only experienced 2 horrifying situations. I'll share with you the worst of the 2. It was a slow night, and I was patrolling the dirt roads in my cruiser. At this particular spot, there were tiny woods on both sides of the road. And then it all started. I spotted somebody jumping into the woods on the left. I only saw half of them though. They were gone so quickly. I pulled up closer and shined the spotlight into the woods. I didn't see them. Unfortunately, it was kind of my job to check on things like this, so I hesitantly stepped out from the car and began searching. In a moment like this, I was so ready to pull my gun, as I was actually terrified. And then, the cliched snap of a branch from behind a tree almost made me want to run back to the car, but I instead did my job and called for them to come out. Someone wearing a mask stepped out from the tree. I told them to raise their arms, take off their mask, and come to me slowly. They raised their hands, but they didn't remove the mask. I tried to demonstrate my authority by yelling this time, ordering them to take it off. They looked as if they were about to take it off, when suddenly, he or she looked to their left, and then back at me. I heard footsteps coming from my right. I drew my gun. I yelled as loud as I could for everybody to come out with their hands up. You may be thinking, why? Well, if you were in this position, in this setting, you would have been shitting yourself just like I was. Another person wearing a mask walked over, this one holding an axe. I had my gun locked on him. But suddenly, footsteps started coming from all directions. I looked around, and I was surrounded. There were at least 10 strangers wearing masks, surrounding me almost in a circle, with only an opening behind me. Half of them were armed with axes and the like. I stood there, gun raised, but not even aimed at anything at this point. I felt like I was going to throw up. One of them, I'm not sure which, finally broke the silence, telling me in a muffled, deep voice, "Go away." My heart dropped as he said this, in a way that I knew I was going to live. I turned and ran for the car, driving down the road half a mile, all while calling for backup. As you would guess, the whole group was gone from the woods when a search squad arrived. I have a theory on this, however. I believe that what I witnessed was some kind of fucked up secret society that was planning on trapping an innocent passerby, and I think that whoever jumped into the woods as I was passing recognized my car as a police car and tried to hide. Had I not been a police officer, I believe they would have stopped me, led me to the woods, and done whatever this group does for its sick kicks. I was at home alone playing Call of Duty between 1 AM and 2 AM. During this time, I got a phone call from a random phone number, and of course, the first thing I think of is that it's just somebody who's either prank calling me or just doesn't have the right number. After I hung up, a few seconds later, I received a phone call from the same number. When this happened, I'll admit I felt a little chill run down my spine, but since I was home alone, I was thinking that if this person was just prank calling me, I could say whatever I want until either I or the person hangs up. So I answered it. I said hello in a sort of annoyed voice, but there was no response. Instead, all I heard was something that still freaks me out. I heard what sounded like a cat hissing, but in a much deeper pitch. Of course, out of surprise, I became defensively hostile. I said into the phone, "Look, buddy, if you call this number again, I'll have my friend who's a police officer track this number and arrest you." But this didn't even faze whoever was on the other end of the phone. Instead, all I got in response was disturbing low-pitched laughter. My heart dropped. "Why are you calling?" I said. Then, this is what still gives me nightmares to this day. As clear as day, in a dark, almost demonic voice, I heard, "I'm just waiting for you to come upstairs." Without hesitation, I ran out of the house and ran across the street to my friend's house and asked his dad to call my dad while trying to explain to him what happened at the same time. After he called my dad, my friend's dad called the police. They arrived in 5 minutes and found nothing upstairs, but they did find the back door open. My dad used to be a paramedic, and after he retired, he remained good friends with a lot of people, one of them being my godmother, Sally. Sally owned a bunny farm and was very friendly. My family and I loved her dearly, and my parents decided to make her my godmother, but she also had a brother named Terry. Terry was a very quiet man. He never said much and kinda had a weird vibe on him, but he was never around that much, so I didn't give it much thought. It was Thanksgiving and we all decided to eat together. It was a great dinner, but his presence just really made me uncomfortable. While they were over, my godmother and I were working on the computer my parents used, and I noticed my brother and Terry were in the family room. I went out to see them just watching TV. Nothing was going on. The next day we all went to church, and Terry asked me if my brother had a Facebook account. I said no, because that was the truth. My brother wasn't into social media, but my thoughts began to wonder why he wanted to befriend my younger brother. At some point he added me on Facebook, and I noticed that his avatar was that anonymous figure. Weird. Why didn't he have his face on his account? I got an instant message from him. The chat went like this. "Hey there," he said. "Hi. What are you doing up so late?" "I'm a night owl, so I'm usually up late." "Doesn't that make your parents mad?" he said. They don't mind," I said. "A naughty girl, aren't we? Staying up late. Would you like to chat?" "Actually, I gotta go now. I have homework," I said, quickly going invisible and closing him out. What the hell kind of chat was that? He was talking to me like I was some slut or something. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to go to his account. He didn't have his friends list blocked, so I was able to see all his friends. What I saw and what I felt that night will always haunt me. He had over 200 friends, and all of them were young men between the ages of 14 to 18. I was so sick as I saw some of the boys were shirtless in their boxers or worse. It's not the fact that he's into men that freaked me out. No, I wouldn't care if he was gay. But this man was targeting young men. Terry was in his 40s. This is why he wanted to know if my brother had a Facebook account. He wanted to add him in his sick boy list. I was shaking as I realized what kind of man this was. I loved my godmother, but this was just sick. I told my parents and reported his account. My dad was shocked, but he also wasn't too surprised, because apparently Terry was reported for selling drugs to kids and touching them on the news one day. I found out the case was dropped because the boys said they were lying, but now I wonder, were they really lying? Since then we stopped talking to my godmother and her sick brother. His Facebook account was taken down, but I know he's still out there targeting young men. I still have nightmares of him going after me and my brother. My parents recently bought a cabin in the woods and would always spend their weekends up there. My little sister would always go with them, so I spent a lot of time home alone over the weekends. One evening, I was bored out of my mind, so I plopped my butt down and played some Legend of Zelda. Now, over the years of living in this house, I developed some kind of natural reaction. Every now and again, whenever my parents needed me, they would call me from the top of the stairs. And for the record, my room was in the basement. Then I would pause the game or stop what I was doing and walk to the stairs and ask them what they needed. And it happened very often. So often, I keep an ear out for the faintest sound coming from upstairs. This one particular night, as I was playing Zelda, I heard someone call my name from upstairs.
"Brandon?"
With this natural instinct kicking in, I got up and walked toward the stairs. It wasn't until I was about halfway to the stairs did I remember that my parents were not home. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me or something. I returned back to the land of Hyrule until I heard my name called again.
"Brandon?"
This time, it was louder, and the voice wasn't my father's. In fact, it wasn't anyone from my family's voice. Maybe a neighbor's? But I know my neighbors well, and I didn't recognize the voice. I bolted upstairs to investigate, shouting for a response. I got none. I looked out the window in our dining room area that gave me a good view of our street. I live in a house at the far end of a cul-de-sac, so we can see every house on the street. Right before the street opens into the big circle of asphalt, there was a dim streetlight illuminating the street. Standing directly under the light was a dark and shadowy figure. I tried to see if I could recognize him, but I couldn't, until I realized something about the man that made my blood freeze in horror. The man had no shadow. And I know that because he was directly under a light source. His shadow would be beneath him. But no. I looked in between the legs. No shadow whatsoever. Suddenly, the streetlight flickered for a split second, and the shadow man disappeared. I then ran frantically around the house, making sure every door and window was locked and secured. I then locked myself in a closet beneath the staircase and played Pokemon on my DS for the rest of the night. Working as a pizza delivery boy, you'll run into a lot of strange things. However, this story may be an excessive example of that. I was 21 years old, and it was a late Friday night shift at John's Pizza, meaning I would be closing with my boss. It was about 9 o'clock, an hour before closing. My next delivery was to the Saugerties, the next town over. The drive wasn't too long, maybe 15 minutes. I was a bit confused. The map was taking me to an isolated road that seemed to lead to nothing. I drove down it anyway, and shortly realized it led to a house by the water. It seemed every light in the house was on. Upon getting closer, I could hear music blasting from inside the house even with my windows shut. Strangely, there were only 2 cars parked in front of the house, at least from what I could tell. It was a pretty wide open property. The front of the house faced the water, so the road, or driveway I suppose, curved around to the front by the water. As I walked up to the front door, I took more notice to the fact that the house was like brand new. I then rang the bell a few times since the music was so loud. I was caught completely off guard when 2 women opened the door, one blonde and one brunette, barely clothed. They had huge, flirty grins on their faces. The blonde woman grabbed the pizza while the brunette handed me a 20. I was about to ask where everyone was, but the brunette called me cute and asked me for my number. I thought I was about to get extremely lucky. After giving her my number, I was about to attempt at getting myself invited in, but the blonde immediately did that for me anyway. I entered the house and picked up on a rather unpleasant odor almost immediately, and there were literally no people anywhere, but I didn't care that much. The 2 women began to lead me upstairs, but unfortunately, this story did not go in the direction you may have hoped it would. I was literally on the 2nd step when a horrifying scream for help came from upstairs. I looked up there and then at the 2 women. They were looking at each other. The blonde one very clearly mouthed the word shit to the brunette. I didn't even really piece everything together at that moment, but I still just kind of instinctively knew to run. I must have looked back like 20 times before I was able to turn around the car and drive back down the long driveway. Looking back through the mirror, I shit you not, at each and every one of the windows in the house, there were heads peering out to me as I drove away. Of course, I called the police on my way back to work and told them to check the place out. They did, and some investigator guy called me back not even an hour later, telling me whoever was there abandoned the place, and that, in fact, it was a brand new, just-built vacant house for sale. It didn't surprise me much. There was no party going on there. That same night, I got a text saying, "We know where you work." That was enough to drive me to quit that job. Since I mentioned a possible victim upstairs to the police, they came to my house to ask a series of questions about the people. I have also had my number changed since then, as I want no possible links to this incident, and I want to live with peace of mind. So it was my last delivery of the night at Domino's Pizza to a house that was about 10 minutes away from the shop. There was a note on the door, which I read after ringing the bell. It said, "To Pizza Guy, please let yourself in and leave the pizza in the upstairs bedroom. Money will be on the bed." Immediately, red flags were springing up in my head all over. I actually called my boss and told him I didn't feel safe going in there, and he actually told me it would be best to just go inside. I tried to use my charm, as people say I have, to persuade my boss, but he was hell-bent on me not bringing back that pizza. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in. It was an average-sized house with some furniture that seemed a bit aged. There was a small nightlight shaped like a candle on the wall, providing just enough light to see a bit into the living room and my way upstairs. There were no lights in any of the rooms up there, just another candle nightlight. More red flags going off in my head. I come to the end of the small hallway upstairs. There are 2 doors, one open, one shut. The open door leads into a dark room, which I had to guess was the bedroom. As you may imagine, I was shaking in my shoes, afraid for any sudden sounds or movements anywhere. I pushed the door open completely and pressed my hand against the wall looking for the light switch. Found it. I flicked it on. Nothing. The lights didn't seem to work in this room. I very slowly walked over to the center of the room until something cushiony stopped my leg. It was a bed. I placed the pizza on the bed and began to search for the money in the dark. Just then, I heard the faintest, quietest thing come from outside of the room. I lifted my head and then resumed searching even faster. I was hoping to God it was just some kind of old person living here and they were too sick or nervous or whatever to meet someone. I found the money. It felt like 2 bills. I hoped they were 10s. I put them in my pocket and left the room. I stopped outside the room and saw the door to the other room was open. I could have sworn it was shut earlier. Your pizza's on the bed. Have a great day. I myself could hear the shake in my voice. There was no kind of response. I started to lean into the dark room to maybe get a better view. Too dark. I reached my hand into the room and searched for a light switch, but something grabbed my arm with a painfully tight grip and tried pulling me into the room. I screamed and jabbed at the arm with my keys, finally breaking free and getting back to my car. Nothing chased me out, nobody followed my car. I told my boss about it, and even talked him into giving me a raise for making me go through that hell. He didn't want me to call the cops for whatever reason. It wasn't really on the top of my mind, but in hindsight, I guess it would have made sense to get the police to check that place out. Anyway, not everything was terrible. I did get my pay raised from $7.50 to $8.50. I was never the delivery boy when I worked at Gino's Pizzeria, but when the new kid called out sick on like his 2nd day, I had to take over for the night. It was a slow Tuesday night for deliveries, so it wasn't too bad. I had a manual 1998 Ford Mustang, a gas guzzler, so I in no way wanted to beat that car around town delivering pizzas. I made 3 normal deliveries within 3 hours. The place closes at 9 on weekdays, so I estimated 1 or maybe 2 more deliveries for the night. I picked up the phone to a customer who sounded like the definition of a meth head or something. She had a raspy voice, she stuttered, she forgot what she was saying, she had long pauses. Literally, there was like a 10-second gap between her saying, "Can I just get a..." and regular pizza. It was a huge production just getting the address from her. Sounded like she was asking someone in the background what the address was. Well, I was just so excited to meet these people. After she gave me the address, she hung up without me even telling her the price or how long. I told my chef, whose name was actually Mario, I know, a bit cliche, 1 regular pie. 10 minutes later, I was on my way. We live in the middle of absolute nowhere, so each delivery was a longer trip with a bigger tip. It took probably 10 minutes for me to get to the location. There was a long and dark gravel road through the woods and occasional trailer homes I had to drive through until I finally reached their home. It was a trailer home. The lights were off inside, but I could see the orange glow of a fire coming from out back, and I could hear a woman yelling at someone. When I shut the passenger side door after grabbing the pizza, I noticed the curtains to one of the windows move. Somebody was just watching me. I didn't know if I should knock on their door or go around back. It sounded like there was more than one person back there, so I decided to just go around back. I greeted them, and they spun around faster than a bullet. They were disgusting. They looked like typical trailer trash meth heads. The woman looked at, I'm guessing her husband, and asked what he's doing here. He then scolded her, saying she was the one who gave the address. They seemed to be standing close together to hide something behind them, and quite frankly, I didn't want to see what it was. I asked them if I should go around front, and then they whispered something to each other. The woman pointed at me and told me to wait there. She would go get the money. She went inside, and for the next 2 minutes, I awkwardly stood there trying not to stare at the scary-looking guy, who I knew was staring at me the whole time. Finally, the woman emerged from the house and went back next to the man. She handed the man some money and asked him to count it. She whispered something after that. I was getting very nervous now. I felt as if they were going to try and rob me or something. I wasn't stupid. The man started counting the money very slow. I mean, really slow, like 5, 10. I kept my eyes on the woman. She was looking into the woods behind me. And then she nodded her head, staring off behind me, and saw some huge guy approaching me with an axe in his hand. I flung the pizza box at him to try and slow him down, and somehow it worked. Or maybe he just didn't chase me. I got home safely. I didn't even go back to work that night. When Mario the chef texted me, I told him what happened, and all he said was, "Holy shit." That was it. I'm happy that was the only night I had to deliver. So if you live in the suburbs or city, sure, be a pizza boy. But if you live in the middle of nowhere, maybe try the supermarket instead. I'll never forget the time me and my brother snuck out past our bedtimes to explore an allegedly haunted house down the block. Yes, I said bedtime, as I was only 10 and my brother Luke was only 12. When our parents said goodnight to us, I went to Luke's room and we took a couple hand-powered flashlights with us and hopped outside through the window. Luckily, his room was on the first floor. Those hand-powered flashlights worked by constantly pushing in a little trigger that would create light inside the lens. They were noisy as hell, but they were convenient. Once we were outside, we just walked down the block, and in 2 minutes we were there. It was rumored by all the neighborhood kids and teens that the place was haunted. Everything about it was creepy. The older, more antique design of the house, the isolation from the rest of the houses, and the broken windows and rotting wood. It seemed perfect for a horror movie. We went around to the backyard. This was all my curious and confident brother's idea. I was scared shitless. The door was locked, as expected. I felt a bit of relief, thinking we might just go home, but my brother made a shocking move next. He grabbed a plank of wood laying in the grass and began smashing the already chipped window. Eventually there was enough of an opening to unlock it and slide it up completely. We hopped inside and began cranking those noisy-ass flashlights. Immediately after entering the house, we both picked up on the fact that it was like 90 degrees in there, which was odd as it was a September night in the mid-70s. There was no graffiti or anything anywhere. In fact, it was relatively empty besides a few pieces of furniture that were clearly not worth taking along. It seemed we were the first to enter the house, shockingly, or at least from the back. We went upstairs to the main floor from the little den area and continued cranking the flashlights. That's when we heard the slightest crack in the floorboards from right above us. We both jumped. I tugged for Luke to leave, but he told me the place is old as hell, it's just house noises. I stopped cranking the flashlight at this point, and I urged Luke to do the same, but he only called me stupid for suggesting something so ridiculous. Then there was another crack in the floorboards from above us. He began walking upstairs. I didn't want to go up there, but I was not about to stay down there alone. I followed behind him to the upstairs. There was a door that led to a room right above where we were standing. I begged him not to open it, but he must have just wanted to be the big, tough older brother. He began to reach for the doorknob while still cranking the noisy flashlight, but then he stopped. I was confused. I could see in the dark he was moving his ear up against the door, listening for something. Silence. Then, the most deafening, nightmare-inducing moment of my life. A single bang on the door from the other side sent my brother staggering into the wall in pain, covering his ear. We dropped the flashlights and ran straight out the back door and back home. We were so loud when we got back that our parents found us out. We told them what happened, but they naturally didn't care and grounded us both for a week. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of something from outside my window and a glare of brightness sneaking in through my slightly opened blind. I sat up, and my heart sank when I realized it was the sound of the crank to my flashlight. I stood up and looked out the window, and that's when it stopped. There was nothing but complete blackness out there after that. I woke the next day barely remembering what happened, and I still hope today that that part was just a dream. This is a story that happened to me recently. I was still in my first year of university, and I've only just made friends with a few other students. Albeit an old and notorious university for its ghostly figures and paranormal activity, the campus janitors and security were all too familiar with unusual reports. The art and design faculty was subjected to the oldest campus of the 4 separate buildings, and the block my class happened to progress in was the allegedly haunted section as well. It was late in the afternoon, just before 5, and my friend needed to use the restroom. She asked me to accompany her, and I obliged, seeing it as an opportunity to rest my eyes from the strains of the projector. She rushed into one of the stalls, and I waited outside the bathroom. Feeling that she would take longer than I initially anticipated, I decided to walk back to class without telling her. As soon as I sat down, she barged into the class, calling out for me. According to her claim, she heard the sink's tap turn on and thought it was me playing a prank. As she opened the door, she saw no one else in the restroom besides herself, yet the other stall next to her was locked from the inside. Thinking it was someone else on the toilet, she asked if it was me. No answer. Curious, she looked down the gap but saw no shoes or legs, yet heard feminine whispers and humming from that particular stall. Frightened, she left without saying another word. Class ended and we went home, but the thought of the occurrence remained. We later learned from one of the janitors that no one should ever be in the restroom after 5 in the evening, as there is a known ghost of a woman who resides in the stalls. Needless to say, as juniors in the university, my friends and I decided to never use the bathrooms after the designated time. I'm not in any way saying these claims are true, but everything I told you is true in regards to what I was told. Whether these things I was told by my friend and the janitor are true or not remains a mystery to me. This happened a few months ago while I was serving in Japan as a missionary for the Mormon Church. I was in the country for 2 years, and my time to return home was approaching. I was in my last area, Kyoto, a bustling tourist attraction, an ancient Japanese city I've wanted to visit all my life. Anyway, it was late at night, and my companion and I were knocking on doors to see if anyone had interest in learning about Christ. We came across this one apartment building and decided to give it a shot. In Japan, there are 3 kinds of apartments: super luxurious suites, decent apartments with 4 to 5 rooms total, or ghetto as crap. This apartment was the latter. We were on the 2nd floor of this building and knocked on this one door. A middle-aged man in worn-out clothes answered with an awkward smile on his face. Being the kind missionaries we were, we introduced ourselves and asked him if he would like to learn about what we believe. Instead of giving us a direct answer, he invited us in. Usually, in missionary work, this is a good sign, but upon stepping foot into that apartment, I knew what we got ourselves into. This apartment reeked with the smell of marijuana and urine. His apartment was puny: a small entryway, a door on the left leading into a bathroom, a small kitchen to the right, and a small multi-purpose room with a small kneeling table, TV, and bed. That's it. Judging by the way he was behaving and most of the decor in his apartment, I knew this guy definitely had some sins worth confessing. He sat us down on either side of the table and started to rant on about how he hates Christians and wants to kill them. That made my companion and I tense up a bit. But the man was plastered. In the time this was going on, he drank like 10 times his weight in booze. We just prayed and hoped he wouldn't recognize who we were and what he was telling us. Then he said, "I'm going to tell you a secret and you can't tell anyone." He then pulled out from under his bed a box. He opened it to reveal thousands and thousands of dollars worth of Japanese yen, and yes, it was authentic. We even examined it. This man was an illegal drug lord who worked with the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia group. We then realized that if this man knew what he just did and showed us, he would kill us for sure, or at least take us hostage. My companion and I feared for our lives and tried to come up with an excuse to get away, but he wouldn't let us go. He kept ranting on about irrelevant things and saying how Christianity was an evil cult of some kind. We tried to explain our side of the story, but there's no use in reasoning with a drunk drug lord who works for the Japanese mafia. It then got to the point where we practically had to run for the door. We said we were leaving, stood up, and quickly walked over to the door. The guy then stood up and began to reach for something in a box, but we never saw what it was. As soon as the door closed, we bolted home, faster than we ever had. The last thing we wanted was him sobering up to find out he had revealed his deepest, darkest secrets to 2 Christian missionaries from America. Had this man not been drunk, he probably would have killed us. For all we know, he was reaching for a gun as we were leaving. When I was 15 years old, I was home alone one night for whatever reason. My bedroom was on the first floor, right next to the living room. It's a strange setup. I had the door shut and was playing video games when I heard a strange sound come out from in the living room. It took me a few moments to figure out that it was a tap on the window. I stepped through the dark living room and out the front door and checked the bushes by the window. Nobody was there. I went back to my room with the door open and resumed playing the game. 5 seconds later, another knock on the glass. This time I ran to the front door barefoot, ready to chase the pranksters, but again, no one was in the bushes. No one was even in sight. I chose to just ignore it from here on out. On my way back to my room, there was another knock. I ran over to the window to try and catch them. There wasn't anyone outside, but I felt something right above the tip of my toes. I looked down and saw the dark shadow of a figure sitting down by the window. I think I was back in my room in a matter of 2 seconds with the door locked. I was hiding under my bed trying to call my dad. The knocking on the glass continued from outside. When I explained to my dad, he called me crazy for not calling the police, so he told me he would for me and to wait in my room with the door locked. I'd say about 5 minutes later, the knocking stopped, and 10 minutes later, the cops arrived. The figure was gone, but there were no signs of entry or exit, as all the doors were locked and all the windows shut. Still, we haven't seen or heard of anything since then, but it's still creepy as hell to think about. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and I didn't know anyone in the area except for the family my dad was friends with, a single mom with 3 kids. Luckily there was a girl a couple of years older than me. She was 12 at the time I met her, and we got to know each other a little over a couple of years. We weren't close, but we ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work. Her mother has been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Rob is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom, since she knocks a certain way when coming in, and he answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in. This is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbor's house to call the police. The lady brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her, and left her body naked in a bathtub. She even hid her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. It happened to my wife's grandmother about 15 years ago while we were still dating. Her husband had just passed away about a year previously, but she'd been going down to the library and volunteering. It was exercise and socialization. This was in the winter, so her walk back was while it was getting dark. The library closed at 5 and there was some extra stuff to do before everyone actually left. And on this particular night, she turned down a ride from another volunteer because she needed to stay in shape. The house is about a mile away through some lightly wooded area in South Texas, and as she's about halfway home, she notices someone behind her. He's walking the same direction and gaining on her, which in itself isn't all that particular. She's old and thus not particularly fast, but in this case he seems vaguely sinister. They keep walking. Pretty soon he's right behind her. Then he falls into pace, just staying behind her. Now she knows something's up. But she's almost home. She can see the top of her driveway coming up, and she leaves her lights on so it'll look like someone's home when she's walking in. She just needs to make it another 150 yards. Then 100. All that time, she said he was so close that she could feel his breath on her neck. Around maybe 50 yards, it happens. A strong hand on her shoulder. "Okay, bitch, don't turn around and hand over your purse or I'll cut you." She stops for a second, then takes one big step forward, turns, and shoots the guy in the neck with the .38 she keeps in her purse. The guy spent the next 5 years in a prison hospital before he died of complications. My wife's grandmother passed last year, but up to the end, she lamented that she pulled the trigger too soon. When I was young, I'd say 8 to 11-ish, my sister, whom is 7 years older, would babysit when my parents were out. At the time, she smoked a lot, and my parents made her smoke outside, of course. So I'd follow her outside, play around, annoy her and such. One day, my sister notices a car at the end of the driveway, just sitting in the road. It's a white SUV with a bike rack on top. It has the most tinted windows I've ever seen. You could not see inside from the side. It sat there until she went inside, then would drive to the end of the road and sit at the church parking lot and wait. Wait until she'd come out again for another smoke. And it would repeat this. Odd, but my sister is a brave lady and just kind of ignored it. That is, until the next day while my parents were out again and it showed up again. It would sit at the end of the driveway and just watch. I don't know what the driver was doing, but he was watching my sister. I know, because if I didn't go out, I'd watch from the front window and it would just sit there and watch my sister. She told my father, who was a sheriff deputy at the time, and he called the cops and made a complaint. They showed up, looked around, but the SUV was nowhere to be seen. Months went by and nothing. Then one day, a good 9 months after this had all started and around 4 months since the last sighting, it was back. It became a regular occurrence. Another day, my sister was outside doing her nasty habit, and sure enough, here it comes. This time we were all alone as usual, and she decides she has had enough. She tells me to stay in the carport and she's gonna go confront them. She starts walking toward the SUV, and halfway down the driveway, she would later remark to us, "I felt utter terror, like I knew if I went any further, I was dead. I was paralyzed by pure fear." She turned around and went inside. Finally, the family car was in the shop for some kind of issue, so we were all stuck home for the night. While my parents are home, my sister goes outside to smoke. I go outside with her, and eventually the SUV shows up. She tells me to run inside and tell my father, and I do. My dad promptly gets his gun and starts briskly walking down the driveway with it in hand, in the direction of the SUV, but not leveled towards it. The SUV floored it down the road and peeled out onto the nearby large highway. My dad, being a cop, noted the year and model and distinguishing features. The scariest thing, the license plate had been covered in duct tape. We never saw it again. I was just 4 or 5 years old and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of the hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the 1st floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer, and my mom had a window open in her room, which was directly behind the bed above the headboard. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the doorframe of my mom's room. I should note her door was open and you could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was typically always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and woke her up. In the 3 or 4 seconds it took me to wake her up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up at the doorframe, and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of the bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. She quickly followed and we were able to start screaming for help and someone called 911. The police came but didn't see any signs of forced entry, only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe that the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. One day while doing my laundry, one of the lights blew out in my basement. My basement is set up so that the laundry room is split up from the other side of the basement with a wall and a door. In order to get upstairs, you have to exit the laundry room and go through the other part of the basement. So the light blew in the other part, not the laundry room. As it was the only light on that side, it was pretty dark. I finished the laundry I had to do while dreading the walk through the dark basement. I exit the laundry room, get halfway through the basement, and I hear a loud cackle. Imagine a sound people make when they imitate a witch. Take that and imagine the witch had been smoking for 50 years, making her voice deeper and hoarser. That's what I heard, clear as day, right behind me. I didn't hesitate to bolt for the stairs. I waited until my father got home and then changed the bulb. I have yet to hear that cackle since, and I have not told a single person in the house about it. This happened to a friend of mine. She told me about it about a year or so ago. We'll call her Minji. Minji is in her late 20s and works as an English tutor in South Korea. One evening, a few years ago, she was tutoring a high school boy. They were up studying pretty late and the buses stopped running. Being a long way from his house, the boy asked if he could crash on her floor overnight and get the first bus in the morning. Minji was very reluctant because inviting a teenage male student to stay the night didn't sound like a great idea, but he was begging her and eventually she relented. They went back into her one-room apartment and she got into the bed while he laid a blanket out on the floor and they both fell asleep. A few hours later, at maybe 2 a.m., the boy wakes Minji up. "I'm really hungry," he says. "Let's go get some food." Minji opens her eyes and looks up at him in disbelief. "Food? Now? It's 2 a.m. Go back to bed." But the student insists. "No, I'm so hungry. Let's eat something now." She tells him that there's some ramen in the kitchen and he could fix himself some. This doesn't satisfy him. He doesn't want ramen. "There's a 24-hour place just down the road. Let's go there." Eventually, after several minutes of persuasion, the boy gets Minji to come with him to the restaurant. They leave the apartment and head out, As soon as they're on the street, the boy turns to Minji and says, "I'm not hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." They call the police and discover that a homeless man had been living in Minji's apartment, sleeping under the bed for 2 months. The boy only saw him because he was lying on the floor, so he had a clear view under the bed. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all 2-lane road through total nothingness, except for a passing through Amboy. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I'm driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes. A suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere and 2 bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber a round. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Something was just wrong. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. Past the guy in the road on his left, swerve to the right of the woman, behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it down, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it, or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple of 100 feet and slowed down, so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rear view mirror, I saw that the 2 bodies had gotten up to their knees, and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor, and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies, or stopped my car closer to them. Some friends and I were doing some night fishing on the James River. We were sitting along the shoreline with a nice fire going, accompanied by the usual idle talk and a few beers, when suddenly, everyone just stopped talking, like a switch was flipped off. We were all staring across the river and felt as if something, or someone, was staring back. It was a very uneasy feeling, to which some of the group tried to shake off with typical macho humor, when a blood-curdling sound erupted from the other shore that froze everyone in their tracks. The sound was unlike any other that I had ever heard, and it made every hair on my body vibrate and tingle. The only way I could describe it is it sounded like a wild person with no language skills being gutted alive. No words, just this high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. Nobody moved or said a word. We all just sat there fixed in our stare, when just as suddenly, a second scream was let loose with even more force than the first. By this time, several of us were sprinting to our trucks that were parked a few yards away, retrieving various firearms. When we got back, we all sat there quietly, with our eyes fixed, staring toward the opposite shore, watching the light from our fire reflecting off the rocks. We sat there waiting for another scream, or something to move on the other side of the river. Finally, a third scream came just as suddenly, but this time, it was on our side of the river, coming from the bushes about a yard away. We all hightailed out of there, leaving most of our stuff behind. When we got to our trucks, we heard the scream one more time, just beyond the tree line. We all floored it the hell away from there, and never found out what was making the sounds. It was a Friday night, and my friend was picking me up in his car from my house. I was in a hurry since we were running late for the hockey game in the city. The whole car ride there, we were having such a good time that I hadn't even noticed that I didn't have my phone. I searched the car seat, the floor, but it wasn't in the car. I was sure that I had just forgotten it. During the hockey game, I couldn't stop worrying that maybe I had dropped my phone somewhere, so I borrowed my friend's phone and ran to the bathroom. I dialed my number and hoped someone at my house would pick up. It took 3 rings before somebody picked up, but they remained silent on the other end. I yelled into the phone that I was just checking if I had left my phone at home. They didn't answer. I assumed it was my little brother just messing with me, so I hung up. I got home late that night to see that my parents weren't home. I got inside my house and called them to see where they were. They told me that they had gone out to eat and see a concert at the park with my little brother. They said they left soon after I had for the game, and they should be home in around half an hour. So I hung up and proceeded to look for my cell phone. But then I realized, how could somebody in my family have picked up my phone if they hadn't been home? I felt a pain in my stomach as fear swept over. It was at that moment that I heard the back door to my house open and close. I immediately jolted out the front door to the neighbors and called the police. Apparently, the back door was left open and somebody had simply walked into our house. Nothing was stolen, but the scariest thing is the thought that we could have fallen asleep with a stranger in the house. A while back, there was a family that moved in next door to my family. They had a son who was just twisted. He was obsessive over slasher movies and always wanted me to talk about shit that happened during my time serving in Vietnam that no normal person would want to hear. He also loved tormenting stray animals. This guy was a whack job. He was 19 at the time and my daughter was 7, but he always wanted to talk to her. He'd strike up conversation with her when she walked home from school. He would talk over the fence at her when she was playing in the back. But what really set me off was when he called our house looking to speak to her. That was it. I went over and flipped shit at him and his parents. Told him to stay the hell away from her and I'd better not ever see him again. That's when things got weird. My daughter was always a little imaginative and paranoid. She would think there were monsters under her bed and whatnot, so when she told me there was something living in her closet and she was too scared to get up and tell us at night, but it wasn't there in the daytime, we blew it off as no big deal. A few weeks went by and one night my wife and daughter were staying at my mother's for a girls' night. So I turned the key on the HBO box and watched me some movies, eventually falling asleep downstairs. At around 2 a.m., I get a call from my neighbor with a creepy son telling me something along the lines of, "We saw that you were up, so we called. Our son is missing. I went by his room to use the bathroom and his door was open, which isn't usual, and there was no sign of him. We need help looking for him." The phone call woke me up though. I wasn't up. So I asked why they thought I was. "Oh, we saw you walking around upstairs and the light is on." My blood ran cold as ice. I'd been passed out on the couch and I know no one turned any lights on. I hung up on them, ran outside to my truck to grab my shotgun, but noticed the sheriff pulling up to my neighbor's house by this point. I booked it over and told him there was someone in my house, and now I could see the lights in my daughter's room were on, and there was a silhouette pacing back and forth. When the deputies went in, they found the neighbor boy there waiting in my daughter's room with a nice little setup in her closet. He said he liked to watch her sleep in the moonlight. Ever since I can remember, we've always had one of those old vintage Parker Brother Ouija boards sitting in our closet collecting dust. When I was a kid, I always wondered what it was. From the box, it seemed like a horrible board game, until one day I found out what a Ouija board really is, and immediately dug it out of the closet. I insisted on my brother trying it out with me, and eventually got him to play along. We put our hands on the planchette, and I began asking the typical cliche questions like, "Is there anybody there?" and "Can you answer me?" Other than my brother jokingly moving the planchette around to imitate an answer from some kind of entity, there was no real response. After getting bored, we put the game back in the box. I did a little research that night to find out how to make Ouija boards work. Many people said online that the most ideal environment when using a Ouija board is in a dark room only lit by candles. So when my parents weren't home, I managed to gather like 6 or 7 candles and convinced my brother to try it one more time. I lit the candles and set them around the table in the dining room with all the lights out. We tried one more time. I asked again if there was anybody there. The planchette began to move. I told my brother to stop moving it, but he swore he wasn't. I told him to move his hand away, and he did. It kept moving. My brother thought I was messing with him, but I didn't pay attention. The planchette landed on the word yes. I was only 9, so I was legitimately shitting myself. My older brother had to take over. He asked the question, "Are you a good spirit?" There was a 5-second pause before my brother's hand moved along with the planchette to the word no. We both looked at each other, and at this point I ran to my room and shut the door behind me, but he continued on with the so-called game. I heard his muffled voice come from down in the dining room, when all of a sudden I heard him screaming at the top of his lungs. I ran back downstairs to see what was wrong. He was holding up his shirt, revealing a small open wound that almost looked like a claw mark. He told me to set the fireplace immediately, and I obeyed. He threw the thing in the fireplace and told me to never speak of what happened to anybody. We have never used a Ouija board since. I got a call from my cousin who said that he, his brother, his dad, and his best friend were using a Ouija board in their basement. Prior to starting, they took a large porcelain doll out of the room because it was creepy, and placed it in the adjacent room face down on a pile of towels. My cousin took a short break because the board was just spouting nonsense and he had to go to the bathroom. His dad and brother and friends started asking the board questions without him. One of the questions was, who is in the other room? It just started spouting random numbers, and when my cousin came back into the room, his brother said that it wasn't working, that they were going to put it away, and he showed him the answer to the last question he asked, and he said, "Dude, that's my social security number." Then they started to talk to whatever started spewing answers out. It told my cousin he would die in the Air Force. At this point, they tell the entity they're communicating with to prove itself. It then spelled out the word doll, and they immediately got a bad feeling. They opened the door to check on the porcelain doll they had laid in the other room, and when they opened the door, the doll was standing up right in front of the door, staring at them. Everyone freaked out and ran out of the house. His best friend burned the Ouija board, and I think he temporarily went nuts for a few months. My cousin, for some reason, then joined the Air Force, and is on a base in Europe now. I had some of my friends over one night, so we tried out the Ouija board we found in someone's garbage. It had the board and the glass piece that you hold onto. The 4 of us held onto the piece and asked stupid questions, just messing around. At all times, one of us were moving around the glass piece just to try and fool the others. When one of my friends went to the bathroom and the other got bored, it was just me and one of my other friends still holding onto it. I asked the board when I will die, and the piece started slowly moving to the letter T. I laughed, looking at my friend, thinking it was him, but he just told me that he thought it was me. The piece then moved to the letter O, and then M, and then back to O, and then R, and then I realized that it was spelling out the word tomorrow. My friend let go of it, and it stopped moving, so I was convinced that it was him, but he swore left and right it wasn't him. But here's where it gets horrifying. The next day, while walking my dog to the preserve, my dog's collar suddenly snaps and he was free from the leash. He darted into the road and I immediately chased after him, only to hear the horn of an oncoming car blaring and getting louder. I dove as fast as I could out of the way, just barely grazing the car with my foot as it passed. But it didn't end there. The same day, while sitting under the ceiling fan in the kitchen on full blast, I got up to get something out of the fridge, and behind me, I heard a loud crashing sound as all the glass on the table was shattered and everything fell onto the floor. The fan had fallen off the ceiling, and I was inches away from being decapitated. I really don't know if I find it to be a coincidence that the day after the Ouija board said I would die the next day, that I had 2 near-death experiences. All I know is I'm never touching a Ouija board again. I have never really told people about this. We had a huge closet full of old board games, and one of them happened to be a Ouija board. I always wanted to try it out, but my family was always home, and I felt weird trying it in front of them. There was this one weekend that my parents were going to the city, and my brother was going on a Boy Scout campout, so I would have the whole house to myself for a weekend. It might have been pathetic that I was more excited to try out a Ouija board than to party with friends while the house was empty. The weather was terrible, windy and rainy, but I felt that a rainy night would actually make it more ritualistic. Around midnight, I set up the board in my dining room and dimmed the lights. I asked a bunch of questions that generated no answers, so I eventually put the board away and went to bed. I woke up in the middle of the night to hear a creaking noise downstairs by the front door. At first I thought nothing of it, but then I heard it again, and it was closer this time, closer to the stairs. I sat up now. At this point I was getting concerned. Another creaking sound, this time from one of the stairs. I was sure somebody was in my house. This was before cell phones were mainstream, so calling the police wasn't even an option. The creaking sounds were getting closer until they were right outside my door, and then they just stopped. It felt like hours while I laid there clutching my covers, waiting for something to happen. A huge strike of lightning momentarily lit up my bedroom, and I swore I could see some kind of black limb-type objects wrapped around the open door. I tried to hold my breath to be as quiet as possible, but what happened next was the worst part. My door suddenly slammed shut, and I couldn't help but let out a shriek. By now I was completely under my covers, shaking and crying and wanting to scream. All the windows in the house were closed, so there was no draft. I just knew something was going to happen, but nothing happened. I sat under my covers for hours, thinking somebody or something was in the room with me. When the sun started to rise, I finally snuck a peek out of my covers. My room was just as empty as before. I somehow found the courage to leave my bedroom and search for any signs of a break-in. Everything looked normal though. No broken windows or unlocked doors. I then spotted the Ouija board on the table again. I have always been kind of superstitious, so I immediately linked the happenings to the Ouija board. I chucked the damn thing in the outside trash can and brought it out front to the curb. Since then, nothing has happened, and I didn't tell anybody about it. You wouldn't understand unless you were in that kind of situation. Then you would agree that nobody would believe a word you say. Nobody really knows except for the people that read my story online. I know for a fact that those events were linked to the Ouija board. I can tell you from personal experience that trying a Ouija board is a huge mistake. It was the summer of 2013. My friend had a vintage Ouija board that was allegedly worth a decent amount of money. My friend agreed to trade it with me for a video game that I never played, so I happily made the trade. I tried using it alone, but it proved to be just a scam. I didn't really expect it to work. I mainly got it just for the money to be made off of it. I threw the stupid thing on the floor of my living room and forgot about it. Everything was going normal until the next morning. I woke up and found that the 2 plants I had sitting on my coffee table had been knocked over, and the Ouija board was sitting on the table. I didn't remember putting it there, nor did I understand how the plants could have fallen over. Wind was definitely not an answer. I wondered if it was possible that I had sleepwalked, or maybe I was half awake and walked down to get a glass of water and bumped into them or something. I moved everything back in place, but the carpet already had dirt stains on it. I brought the Ouija board box up to my room and tossed it on the floor. Things got bad that night. While laying awake in the dark, I was disturbed by the sound of a muffled click. I looked up, not sure what it was, and then I saw through the cracks of my closet door that my closet light was on. I had no idea how it could have turned on, but I got up and opened the closet door anyway. There was nobody in there, but that hadn't even crossed my mind. I turned the light off and jumped back into bed. Probably 10 minutes later, I heard the same clicking sound. Naturally, I looked to the closet and felt my heart sink a little. The closet light was on again. A mix of confusion and fear started building up inside of me. I once again turned off the light and cautiously got back in my bed. I found myself waiting for the closet light to click on again, but what happened instead was much worse. Instead of the closet light turning on, the whole room suddenly filled with light as I heard the main light switch flick on. I had seen enough and was out the door within seconds. I quickly pieced things together and chucked that old Ouija board in the closest dumpster. Nothing weird ever happened after that. I was working the night shift at my local Waldbaum's back when it used to be open 24 hours a day. There would normally be less than 10 customers throughout my shift, but I wouldn't get to sit around and do nothing though. They wanted me to work on stock when I wasn't helping a customer. It was a bigger Waldbaum's, so oftentimes there may have been one other person in the building, whether it be someone working on stock or someone cleaning. This night, I was the only one working. I was working stock in the cereal aisle when I heard something fall over on the other side of the shelf in the next aisle over. I would always hear the door to the store sliding open. It was the loudest thing ever, so it kinda caught me off guard that there might have been a customer in the building. Of course, it wasn't weird. Yet. Not until I looked to my left and saw a man standing by the edge of the aisle, shooting me a blank stare. "Do you need something, sir?" I asked him. No. Could you just point me to the eggs?" he said. He wasn't normal looking. His face looked weird. Not exactly ugly, just unusual. Like his upper lip kind of came out too far. Almost like a Simpsons character. I was a bit uncomfortable that I had to deal with ringing him up. I hurried to finish the cereal aisle, and when I was done, I began to bring the U-boat cart to the back room. I was stopped halfway when the same guy cut me off through the middle section of the aisle. I want to note this guy was probably in his mid-30s, and at the time, I was only 22, though I looked much younger. The guy stopped me and started trying to make awkward small talk. He started by asking me my name, how old I was, if and where I went to school, and why I was doing the night shift. His questions started to get weirder when he asked me if I went to parties a lot and if I had a girlfriend. I told him I didn't, and then he asked me if I've ever had a boyfriend while putting his hand on my shoulder. I immediately started walking away with the cart, but he followed me. I told him I wasn't into whatever he was thinking about. I went faster and faster until I finally made it to the back storage room. He didn't follow me in. I wasn't supposed to stay back there for extended periods of time to avoid customer theft. I decided it would be best to just wait for him by the register so that he would ring his stuff up and leave. But I waited there for at least 20 minutes. He never came. I decided he was gone, and whether he stole the eggs and something else, there wasn't anything I could do now. I had to go to the bathroom, so I took a quick jog to the back of the store and into the employee bathroom. Moments after sitting on the toilet, my heart dropped into my stomach as I heard the bathroom door open. I choked the urge to say something like, "You can't be in here," but I didn't want to give away my position. I lifted my leg so that I wouldn't be visible from under the stall, and what happened next was simply horrifying. I sat there for the longest time, looking at the floor, not moving a muscle. When I finally looked up, I could see an eye peering through the crack of the stall door. I screamed. I knew I was trapped. I knew I had one shot at making a move. I grabbed the box cutter in my pocket and began sliding it through the crack of the door, forcing him to move his eye away. I took that chance to slam the stall door open in his face and hightail it out of the bathroom and all the way out of the store. I called my boss at least 5 times before he finally picked up and explained everything. He told me to call the cops, and so I did. Of course, the man wasn't in the store anymore by the time the cops showed up. I only did the night shift twice after that, and luckily didn't see the man again. I used to work the night shift at a gas station on the side of some highway in the country. From the hours of 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., the road was pretty dead. I would have maybe 1 or 2 people come in to pick cash in the whole night. It was a very boring and depressing job, especially doing the graveyard shift, but I had just finished college and I needed to pay off my loans. The only reason I kept this job was because my boss threw me an extra $5 an hour for doing the night shift. On this one cold December night, I was doing my usual thing, reading the newspaper, playing games on my phone, and whatnot, when I noticed the headlights of a car pulling off the highway into the parking lot. It was a red pickup truck. Somebody stepped out and shut the door. I went back to reading the paper as I saw that he was standing by the gas pump. I assumed he wasn't paying cash. I looked up a few moments later and saw that he was still standing in the same position, staring at the gas pump. I almost felt obligated to go out and help him. He was obviously confused. I felt a cold chill run up my spine as I saw the 6-foot-something tall man slowly turn his head to face me. I couldn't make out any features of his face, but I knew he was staring at me. I tried to pretend I didn't notice by going back to reading the paper. Of course, I wasn't really reading now. I was a bit shaken by the guy out there. I just wanted him to pay debit or credit and leave. I looked up and gasped as the man was now much closer to the front door of the building. It wouldn't have been so disturbing if it weren't for the fact that he wasn't moving. He was just standing still, as before, still looking in my direction. I walked over to the door to get a closer look. All I could see in his face was still blackness. I locked the door and flipped the open sign to closed on the door. I didn't care if this would possibly get me in trouble. I was not taking a chance because, quite frankly, I was scared shitless. I walked back behind the counter and sat down on one of the containers on the floor just so I couldn't see the man outside anymore. I stayed in that position for a good 5 minutes, texting every friend I have to see who was awake. I was desperate to tell somebody about this. When I finally got up to check that he was gone, I let out a full scream as the man was now right outside the door. I picked up the phone on the counter and called the police. The operator was reluctant to send somebody over because of the way I described the situation, but I persuaded them. I hid behind the counter, balled up like a child. I began to hear heavy thumps at the door, not innocent knocks to catch my attention. I mean thuds and thumps, trying to break down the door. And then eventually it finally stopped. I heard the sound of a car starting outside and then driving off. I looked outside and he was gone. A patrol cop along with a state trooper pulled into the parking lot. I reported the red pickup truck and told them which direction I thought he went in. I couldn't describe his face as all I saw was blackness. Of course, there wasn't much the police could do as the man didn't really do anything. I left that job a few months later to a job in the city. It was 2 years ago. I was called in to do the night shift, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. at 7-Eleven, since somebody called out. The store was located on a busy road in a rather quiet and rural area. During the night shift, you could expect anywhere from 10 to 20 people come in to buy a beer or something else. This one particular night, there was this one guy, mid-20s, that came in. He started making weird noises, like loud yelling noises. I assumed he had some kind of mental disability. In fact, my brother has a mental disability, so I immediately felt sympathy for the guy. He walked up to the counter without any items, with his head facing me, but his eyes were looking up at the ceiling. I felt uncomfortable. I honestly didn't know how to deal with it. I tried speaking with him, but he only responded in loud noises. I kept checking if he was with someone outside, but he was alone. There weren't any cars in the parking lot, so I assumed he walked. He stood there for so long, looking up at the ceiling and making noises, that I tried to get him out by handing him a bag of chips and telling him he can go. I tried finding some kind of number to call for someone to help him. Then, out of nowhere, he finally turned around and walked out of the store. I felt so horrible for the man, but at the same time, I felt a bit creeped out. About an hour later, the phone on the counter rang. I picked up to hear the familiar yelling sounds of the man from earlier. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to think, other than this has to be some kind of prank. I hung up on them and was now becoming paranoid of my surroundings, constantly checking the outside through the windows. Come 4 o'clock, the person working after me came in, finally allowing for me to go home. It wasn't my problem anymore. I got home and threw all my stuff on the table, ready to get to sleep. But my phone rang within a minute after entering the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would someone be calling at 4 a.m.? I could only imagine it was bad news. I braced myself and picked up the phone to hear the man again. I felt sick to my stomach as I listened to the loud noises he made. I struggled to slam the phone to the receiver. All night I felt like I was being watched, even with all the blinds shut. And I could swear I heard strange noises coming from all over my house. I refused to get any sleep until the sun came up. Weeks passed and I had forgotten about the incident, until one day, when going into the basement for the first time in a while, I found that papers had been scattered all over the floor, and when I went into the basement closet, I found writing on the walls. 7-Eleven had been written in Sharpie on the wall, along with the address to the 7-Eleven I worked at and my house address. The most disturbing part, I also found various kitchen knives along with a large pocket knife sitting in the closet. What started out as seemingly just an innocent person turning into something of a prank ultimately turned into something much more horrifying. He had been living down there for God knows how long, and I'm just grateful that for whatever reason he changed his mind and left, because I haven't seen or heard from him since. All I can say is that man is dangerously ill. I've worked in the K-9 unit for 9 years, and I've worked my fair share of graveyard shifts. I've definitely come across weird things at night, but I'll never forget this one night. I worked with my dog Sammy, a German Shepherd. She was 2 years old at the time and was still kind of new to the job, just like me. I was driving down a road surrounded by crops when I spotted a suspicious-looking white van parked inside the crops. Both doors were open. I flashed my lights to try and draw out whoever was there. Nobody came out, so I parked and scanned the place out quickly. Nobody was in sight, so I took Sammy with me to track down the driver of the van. Sammy started going crazy when we reached the trunk of the van. She was pulling so hard she almost broke off the leash. I opened the trunk to the van, and a blast of foul air hit me in the face. I almost passed out from the mix of the horrible smell and the pure shock of what I saw in the trunk. I counted 7 full body bags, each with a pair of feet sticking out at the bottom. I requested immediate backup with my radio. I heard the sound of a twig snapping nearby, and Sammy just lost it. I lost grip of the leash, and she took off into the crops. I pulled out my gun and followed the sounds of her barking. As each and every crop hit me in the face, I felt as if something would reach out and grab me. I stopped when I could no longer hear Sammy's barking. But as I stopped, the sounds of movement did not. I realized I heard movement in all directions. I had never experienced such fear in my life. I stood still as the movement around me stopped. And then, out of nowhere, I felt 2 arms wrap around my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fight. I was going to die. And then I heard the sound of Sammy's bark, followed by the scream of the man choking me as Sammy bit down on his leg. The next thing I did is something that I still question if it was appropriate doing to this day. I turned around and pulled the trigger, killing the man. I grabbed Sammy by the leash and ran all the way back to the car. I could tell people were following us from behind. I managed to make it to the car safely and drive a 1/4 mile down the road. I didn't stop to see which way they went. I didn't hold my ground. I fled like a coward. I cared much more about our lives than I did this job, and I'll still say that today. But it still pains me knowing how much of a coward I was. Backup arrived shortly, but the van was gone. I even failed to get the plate number on dashcam video, or even just writing it down. This was within my first few months on the force, but it made me feel like absolute shit for months to come. I, someone who was sworn to protect, let a van full of killers get away.
When my dad passed away, not only did he pass along his fishing boat, but he also passed along his love of fishing to me. The boat is a Rodman 1250, which has a decent sized cabin, allowing me to go overnight deep sea fishing. I usually fish off the coast of Mississippi, and would sail for an hour out to sea, then stop and spend the rest of the day fishing. That's exactly what I did one Friday, taking my cousin Jack. I planned on spending the night and fishing most of Friday, then sailing back. So after sailing out to sea for about an hour, I picked a spot for us to stop and cast our lines. We brought a radio and tons of beers to make the time more pleasant. The sun started to set, and seeing the sun setting in the horizon with no visual intrusions was a beautiful sight. Perhaps the last pleasant thing that would happen that night. By the time the sky was completely dark, we had already packed our stuff for the night and were inside the cabin playing cards and eating burgers. Mid-conversation, Jack stopped me and told me to listen. There was the sound of a boat motor out in the distance. We left the cabin to look into the horizon, but with no moon. It was just too dark to see more than maybe 50 feet in front of us. But over the calm waves, we did hear a boat motor. Whoever was out there didn't have their lights on. The lights in my cabin were on, which was definitely enough for anyone to see us and avoid hitting us. We were expecting the sound of the other boat to sail away into the night. However, it seemed to circle us for a bit, then abruptly stop. The motor just cut, and there was nothing but the sound of the calm water splashing against the boat. Jack started acting a little paranoid. He thought we were being stalked. He wanted me to use the spotlight to look for where this boat could be. I didn't want to do that because that would be a bit obnoxious and obvious. To make him happy though, I started to drive the boat for a few minutes away from the last direction we heard that engine stop. Although maybe I did it because I was a little suspicious about it as well. After a solid 5 minutes of driving the boat in the opposite direction, I killed the motor and we went back inside the cabin to resume playing cards. It felt like only seconds after we sat down, we heard it again. This time I heard it first, but it sounded like the motor was being given much less gas. We went outside again, and at that instant the sound stopped. This time I agreed with Jack. Turning on the spotlight was a necessity now. The spotlight only rotated 180 degrees, so I turned the boat a little to the right so that I could point the light out in the direction we heard the boat. The beam of light shot far into the horizon. I felt my heart racing as I slowly turned the light to point more to the right, and finally I stopped when the light started to land on a boat floating not too far away from us. I turned the light off at once and told Jack to turn the cabin lights off as well. I put the boat in full throttle and sped away from the area. I I steered the boat for about 5 to 10 minutes before thinking it was enough. We hung out outside for a while to ensure we weren't followed again. When it seemed safe to do so, we went to sleep. However, I awoke to a thumping coming from above my head, above the cabin. I looked over at Jack, sleeping on the couch. I whispered his name a few times to wake him up, and I pointed up at the ceiling. He looked up, then back at me, with a look on his face telling me he heard the thumps. I opened the door to the deck and ran outside, and saw 2 men, one on the bow of my boat, the other on a boat floating directly next to mine. Jack came running out behind me. Both of the men slowly put their hands up in front of their faces and claimed they meant no harm. The one on my boat said they were simply almost out of gas and needed help. He said he was going to knock on my cabin door to ask for assistance, but in my head I was thinking, why was he on the bow of my boat then? I very low-key flicked Jack's thigh to indicate to him that I was getting ready to do something rash. The guy stepped down from the front of the boat to the lower deck, right in front of Jack and I. He was significantly taller and bigger than us. He looked at me for a few moments, then reached out his hand, expecting a handshake, without saying anything. I knew something was about to go down with these guys, and for all I knew, that could start with my shaking his hand. Instead of shaking his hand, I pushed the guy overboard into the water with all my strength. Then I ran up the stairs to turn the boat on, while I yelled at Jack to make sure they didn't get back on the boat. We were able to lose them in the night for good this time. I didn't stop though. I kept going the full 2 hours straight back to the shore. We made it back to my dock, and we slept on my boat that night. The next morning we packed up and drove home. Strange things can happen out at sea in the dark, but I never anticipated anything like that. I don't know what those guys were planning on doing to us on my boat, but considering they had been making a point of stalking us, I know it was nothing good. A few years ago, I went on a Norwegian cruise with a few friends. It started out as a great little vacation. However, by the 3rd day at sea, things started getting weird. After 2 days of eating constant sushi, I started to feel a little dizzy and lightheaded at times. My friends told me no more sushi, as it probably had something to do with that. But anyway, after a few drinks, I separated myself from my friends who were sitting in one of the ship's many bars and started walking back to my room because I really wasn't feeling too well. I took some weird lower deck route back in the direction of my room though, since some of the bars were on the lowest public levels of the ship. I asked one of the maids in the hallway which way was the quickest to get to the certain section my room was in. The maid had a very thick accent, but I understood her to have said keep going straight, then make a left at the sign. So I did that. I came to a sign that I don't remember what it said, but it was a sign, so I turned left. There I was in some narrow hall with a tiled floor instead of carpeting. It didn't seem like the right way to go at all. It seemed more like an employees only section. Still, I figured I'd give it a chance before turning back, and continued down this narrow hall. I came to a corner, then looked to my right, and here was the creepiest hallway you could possibly find on this ship. Half the lights were out, one was flashing on and off, but at the end of this tiny hallway was someone standing facing the wall. My head started to hurt even more as I saw this. I had to rub my eyes to make sure what I was seeing was real, but when I moved my hands away from my eyes, the person standing by the wall was now looking at me. Considering they were standing in the dark section of this hallway not lit up by lights, I couldn't really see much about their actual face, other than I knew they were looking at me. I turned and went back the direction I came. I walked back down the hall. The maid was gone now, however, so with my head still killing me, I managed to get back to the lobby of this floor, and at that point finding the elevators was easy. I made it back to my room easily at that point and crashed into bed. I was sure I had gotten food poisoning from the sushi because my stomach was also hurting along with my head. But anyway, I woke up at some odd hour in the night and I couldn't move. The only thing I could move were my eyes. I tried looking around the room, but my inability to move my head or sit in an upright position made seeing a lot of the room difficult. Then I remember something seemed to appear in my peripheral vision. I turned my eyes to the opposite side of the room, and there was a figure facing the wall. As I looked at it, I wanted to scream or run, but I couldn't do anything. It was as real as could be, like I knew I was seeing it. Then the head of the figure turned around to face me, but all I saw was black. The body, the face, everything about this figure just looked black. The figure started to move closer to me. The most disturbing thing about it, though, was that as it moved towards me, it didn't move its limbs. It seemed to just slowly float towards me. The figure stopped over my bed, and now I could slightly see a face to it, and I recognized it as that person I saw earlier in the night in that hallway. I don't remember exactly how long that figure stood over my bed, but suddenly I saw its mouth open twice as wide as you'd expect to be humanly possible, and out came a deafeningly real scream. So loud that I think it woke me up completely from the sleep paralysis I was just in. The craziest thing I remember was the scream of this sleep paralysis figure fading into the scream of my own voice as I was finally able to make noise. I flicked on the light, and my friend, who was in the other bed, woke up asking what's wrong. I told him about the horrible experience I just had. He once again said I'd been eating way too much raw fish, and it was fucking with my head. My whole body was shaking and my voice was trembling. I went back to sleep and don't remember having another dream that night, but I still wonder if that person I saw in the hallway was real or not, because I'm 90% sure that's the hallucination I had in my paralysis. That hallucination was also the realest, most horrific thing I'd ever seen. I live on the east coast of the United States. Recently I moved to Florida from Georgia, and I figured it would take a couple days to sail my boat down there to our new waterfront house. I didn't have any cars with a tow hitch to carry the boat, let alone a trailer to carry it with, so sailing it seemed like the best option, while my wife finished up moving the rest of the stuff to our new house. I kissed my family goodbye and set sail. None of them were really willing to come with me on this adventure, and I didn't blame them. But anyway, I brought enough food and gas to last me the whole trip. The first day was a breeze. I got some sleep, then sailed for 10 hours the next day, with breaks in between, of course. By nightfall, I went to bed in the cabin. Sleeping in a rocking boat isn't exactly the easiest thing to do, so I was up for hours, rolling around on my sides trying to find a comfortable position, trying to press my head firmly enough into the pillow, thinking it would hide the unbearable feeling of the boat rocking over the ocean surface. Eventually, I heard sounds coming from above my head that I could best describe as small thumps. Did it sound like someone walking on my boat? I couldn't tell yet. With a medium-sized fishing boat floating out in the ocean, random sounds like creaks and thumps are going to be made. But these thumps were coming so rapidly and consistently, I started to get sick with the thought that someone out this far could be on my boat. I had to get out and look, but I wanted to be quiet. So I opened the cabin door very slowly, but before I could even open it all the way, I heard a big splash in the water. It sounded to me like someone or something jumped into the water. I was honestly scared I wasn't alone, even though it made no sense to me. I didn't want to go outside, but I felt I should move the boat away from whoever or whatever was out there in the water. So I ran outside to the cockpit and started the boat engine. I gave the boat some gas and got myself the hell away from there. Immediately, I heard my boat bump into something in the water. Not something heavy enough to cause any kind of impact, but heavy enough to hear it and slightly feel the boat bump. I didn't see what it was because, to be honest, I wasn't paying attention to whatever was out in the water. Plus, the lights weren't on. Anyway, I sailed for a few hours in the deep night because I was wide awake anyway. When I started to get tired, I killed the motor and went back to bed. Emphasis on the word bed, not sleep. Because even though I felt tired, I was still having trouble falling asleep. I figure half an hour passed and I started hearing more thumps. This time the thumps seemed louder and more clear for some reason. In a split second, my heart started racing again. The thumps were consistent and deliberate sounding again. No way it was just boat noises. I felt like I was being followed by someone. I couldn't just sit there and hide in the cabin like this all night. I had to sum up the courage to go outside again. But when I checked, there was no one on the entire boat. Was it my imagination? Were the sounds really just coming from the boat? I decided that must have been the case, and once again went back inside the cabin to bed. I lay there, extremely silent now, trying to listen for any little noise. And when I did this, I heard something. I knew I did. It wasn't the sound of thumping or anything like that. I had to perk up my ears to really pay attention, and I figured out what I was hearing. It wasn't the sound of the wind outside or the water hitting the boat. It was the sound of someone breathing. It was not the sound of my breathing, but someone else's. It was coming from inside the cabin, of course. I panicked, but I tried to maintain composure so to not make it obvious. I got out from the bed, walked outside the cabin, and locked myself in the cockpit. I intended on sailing until I could find a dock by the shore. There's a small window that looks into the cockpit from the cabin. It has a curtain. I turned every minute or so at least once to look back at it, expecting to see someone watching me. And one of the times I looked back, I did see someone. The curtain was curved up a little bit in the corner, and I saw someone's eye, and maybe a quarter of their face peeking into the cockpit. I turned away right away, acting like I didn't see them. I had the thought, what if it was my young son trying to scare me? But it wouldn't make sense. I saw him waving goodbye when I set sail from the house. It was 3 or 4 tense hours of hell, thinking at any moment someone could break into the cockpit and stab me, but I made it to shore and sailed through the narrow canal. I had already called the cops 15 minutes earlier, requesting they have a few officers waiting at the dock I was headed to. It was still dark out, but I saw people standing on the dock, and I couldn't have been more excited to get there. When I stopped the boat next to the dock, I came out from the cockpit screaming at the officers to help, pointing at the cabin door. The 2 officers went into the cabin with their hands on their pistols, and 10 seconds later, I heard them yelling at someone. They pulled out some guy with really long, gray, wet hair and a similar beard, wearing wet, skinny, ripped jeans and a gray t-shirt. They had him in cuffs as they walked him past me. He looked at me and just laughed this insanely off-putting laugh. The guy looked and sounded like a meth head, the best way I could describe him. The police questioned him, but he never answered anything as to how or when he got on my boat, or what he was trying to do. But thinking back, when I heard breathing in my cabin, it's likely he was hiding under my bed, and that's the most horrifying thought imaginable. By then, I was exhausted. I went back to my cabin and fell asleep right away. By late morning, I made it to the new house, and my nightmarish adventure was over.
Number 4. This happened during a Boy Scout campout when I was 15. My friend, who was supposed to share the tent with me, called out from the trip at the last minute, so that meant I had to pitch the tent and sleep in it alone. The sun was going down, and after a long day of hiking, we got back to camp to set up our tents. It was already dark at that point, and I was still trying to set it up. It wasn't as easy doing it yourself. Someone came over and finally helped me, and then we ate dinner. After the cliched telling of scary stories around the campfire, we all went to sleep. I guess I was a little happy that I had my own tent at that point, since I had more room. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of somebody stomping around my tent. I immediately assumed it was another scout going to take a leak or something. You may be thinking that all our tents were pitched right next to each other, but our scoutmasters actually had us pitch our tents far apart, so I was pretty far from my closest scoutmates. The stomping around the tent seemed to just be going around in a circle, so at that point, I was sure somebody was messing with me. I asked who it was, and in response to that, they stomped off into the woods. I almost found myself going out and following them, but I figured it wasn't worth it and just tried to fall back asleep. But after that it was hard to. Sure enough, the stomping came back and started circling the tent again. I was pissed off now, so I got up and unzipped the door to the tent. I was expecting to see another scout, but when I confronted the person making the noise, instead I saw a grown man, probably 6'5", in his mid-30s. My heart was racing and I couldn't even gather up the courage to scream. The man gave me a creepy smile and then brought his finger to his lips, signaling for me to be quiet. I did a quick 180 and sprinted to my scoutmaster's tent, screaming like a baby. He ran out before I even reached the tent, and I told him about the man I saw. He and the other scoutmaster ran over to my tent with one of the hunting rifles, but they didn't find the man. They did, however, pick up on the tracks the man left walking around the tent. We were all told to bring our tents closer together, like literally right on top of each other. The trip was cut short the next day and we all went home. I have never gone camping since, and I never will again. Number 3. So me and a couple of my buddies went camping last summer alongside the Willamette River. We actually had a decent hike into the deep end of woods. We did some night fishing, listening to music, and basically drank to the point where everything was funny later in the night. I would guess we finally called it a night somewhere past 2 a.m. I shared a tent with one of my buds while the other two shared another tent. We heard them laughing about something. At first we laughed at the sound of their laughing, but it soon got annoying and we yelled for them to shut up. One of them responded, "It isn't us." I sat up, startled at the response. I came to realize that it was the sound of only one person laughing, and it didn't sound like either one of my friends. Even in my drunk state, I realized how odd it was for somebody to be out this far in the woods so late at night. The laughing gradually got closer and louder to our campout. My friend shot up and looked at me with a worried look on his face. I heard my other friends scream over to us that they were getting freaked out. As the laughing got even closer, I could make it out very clearly to be the laugh of a male, probably in his 30s or 40s. He sounded like he was as drunk as us, messing around with friends, but we only heard his laugh, nobody else. There was something indescribably creepy about his laugh too, as if it was missing something to it. You had to be there to understand what I mean. The laughing was now just at the edge of our campsite, but we couldn't hear any footsteps at all. Now that may not seem like a big deal. It was impossible to move through that without making noise. And finally, all of a sudden, the laughing stopped completely. We had no idea where whoever that was standing, as he hadn't made a single stepping sound. We sat there in silence looking at each other. My friend was clearly freaking out, but he was keeping it together the best he could. Finally, something broke the silence. The sound of something rubbing against the cottony fabric of the tent. We saw the outline of a hand through the moonlight, pressing on the tent. We both screamed at the top of our lungs before getting out of the tent. We ran as fast as we could through the woods, our other friends following us. After about 5 minutes of running, we somehow found our car. I actually puked from running so much before taking the wheel. I don't condone drinking and driving, but I still believe we were just in this situation. By far the most horrific experience of my life. No idea who or what the hell that was, or what they wanted. Number 2. After college, I went backpacking in the Canadian wilderness for a few weeks by myself. To put this in perspective, I was in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was a 3-hour bus ride away, and I only saw one other person, who was from a distance. He was in a canoe, during the entire 7 days. I brought a few disposable cameras with me, as this was before digital cameras were too widespread. I took a lot of pictures. When I got home, I had them developed and took a look at them. The pictures were standard nature shots, until I got about halfway through my first camera. There were 2 pictures of me asleep in my tent in my sleeping bag. I literally freaked out when I saw it, and I had a complete breakdown. To this day, I have no idea how those pictures got taken. I haven't been camping since, and I sleep with my door open and my curtains shut, and I still get the paranoid feeling that whoever took those pictures is still watching me somehow. Number 1. My boyfriend and I decided to go out to the gorge for some quality time camping. We had always gone with several other people, but this was the first time it was just us two. When we got out of our car to prep our gear for the mile hike back to the camping spot, 2 sketchy looking dudes came out of the trailhead, eyed us, and went back onto their old school Volkswagen camper van. I had a weird feeling but shrugged it off and proceeded back to our camping spot. I had previously camped in the same area a handful of times, and I knew it pretty well. Once we got back there, I knew of a handful of different camping spots and proceeded to check them all out for the one that would be ideal for us. I noticed what looked like someone camping further up the hill, so I picked a spot a little further down where we'd most likely be out of sight. Not out of earshot though, as I heard him yelling with someone else back over on the trail. It was starting to get dark by the time we got everything set up, so I figured I'd start looking for firewood. Suddenly, this guy appears out of nowhere and asks us if we'd like any help, and offered to sell us a bundle of firewood for $10. I laughed because we were in the woods, thus surrounded by wood, which I could pick up off the ground for free. He then said that I wouldn't find much because they'd already cleared it out over the past few weeks. Few weeks? I asked him how long he'd been camping up there, and he said almost a month. I already had the creeps about him, and he claimed he was up there by himself. I asked him why I heard him yelling with someone then, and that he had referred to more people when he was talking about the wood. He stammered and was like, yeah, there's some dudes I know camping over there up on the other side of the river. Then he proceeds to tell us that he's been lonely since he arrived. He was from Pennsylvania, took a bus to Lexington, and had been living in the woods back behind where I currently work. I knew exactly where he was talking about, because I saw some homeless people, immigrants, and drug addicts coming in and out of those woods every day. So basically he was a homeless man who somehow got a ride out to the gorge and decided he would just live there instead. He had been living on snakes, bugs, and selling firewood for money. But he said we were the first people he'd seen in a few weeks. His stories were all over the place, and I knew he was lying about a lot of what he told us. He wasn't alone even if he claimed to be. He even took us to his camp where there were tons of stuff for several guys, not just one. He said he liked camping up top where he could see everything, and everyone. Then showed up our campsite. He had a straight shot view. By now it was dark and he helped us get a fire going. I was trying to politely get him on his way back up the hill so I could have a minute to process all of this. When he left, I started whispering to my boyfriend that there was no way in hell I could sleep with that lying, sketchy homeless creep right up the hill. We didn't have a gun, knife, or even a dog to protect ourselves if we needed to. My boyfriend somehow convinced me to stay a little longer, so we planned to stay the night. But all throughout the night, we heard twigs and branches snapping around our tarp, as if somebody was watching us. It was that man. I knew it was. He was standing out there, watching us. I said let's quietly get our shit together and get the hell out of there. Which we did, only we left our new tarp set up because they would make too much noise and he'd know we were leaving. As soon as I stood up with my pack, ready to get the hell out of there, he yells, "Leaving so soon?" We proceeded to get away from there as quickly as possible. The most disturbing thing, as we were getting away from there, the man yelled for us to come back. That only made us go even faster. In my mind, we were either getting robbed, raped, killed, or something, because he was not alone. His stories didn't add up, and his background of where he came from made me believe he was running from something and was trying to hide by living off the grid. I called the Rangers the next morning and told them about him. Luckily, all he got from us was a set of new tarps. I'm currently a freshman in college. I came home this past week for a funeral, but let's backtrack a little. My senior year in high school, I was in the library during study hall doing some computer science work on the computer since my laptop at home didn't have JCreator on it. Anyways, this boy who was in my class sat next to me, since those two computers were the only ones with JCreator. He was a really tall, very pale boy. He had long black hair that covered one of his eyes. He wore an anti-flag tee, ripped jean jacket, and Doc Martens. He never spoke to anyone in class, and I'd never seen him with anyone else. So I took a seat, and he looked up at me like I committed murder. I quickly looked away and started rummaging through my bag as a distraction. As my head was down, I heard him chuckle and then mumble, "Of course." I froze with my head still down towards my bag. I just dismissed it as him talking to his computer, as code can be quite frustrating. I sat back up and quickly typed in my login details. To break the awkwardness, I said, "She assigns too much homework, I can barely keep up." His eyes stayed locked on the computer screen. "You want the answers, don't you?" I laughed and said, "No thanks, I won't learn anything that way." Usually I would have said yes, but I didn't want to see his evil stare again. It was like he was staring into my soul. He laughed again, in that creepy laugh. So creepy that I had to close my eyes and cringe. I opened them and looked over to see him gone. The strange thing was he left his flash drive. I waited about 10 minutes to see if he would come back, but he didn't. Study hall ended at 1 and it was 12:50. I decided I would take it and give it back to him tomorrow in computer science class. I threw it in a little box above my bed. Gotta admit, it was an awesome flash drive. It was a Swiss Army knife with a flash drive in the middle. Here's the crazy part. After that, he never came to school again. He was notorious for being absent, so for the first month no one batted an eye. However, May rolled around and we were all getting ready to graduate. I had completely forgotten about the flash drive, until 2 days ago when I came home. I needed one, and I remembered I still had that boy's. I scanned it with my Norton, and it said it was all safe. I was planning to delete all of his stuff so I could put my PowerPoint for business class on it. Naturally, however, I started snooping through his files. The first thing I saw was a folder named Computer Science. I opened it, and all the answers to every assignment was there. I thought, damn, maybe that's why he left it, so I could copy off of him. Maybe because he knew he was never coming back. I went back, and the second folder was music. I kinda had to open that one to see what he listened to. Surprisingly, not what I expected. There were only 3 songs. Running on Empty by Jackson Browne, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, and Helter Skelter by the Beatles. I went back again. There was an untitled folder. Inside it was AP Literature. There were a bunch of essays and various junk. There was one called The Best.Doc. I opened it, and it was merely a 10-page document of notebook pages filled entirely with his first and last name, handwritten. I went back again. This is where it gets weird. He had taken pictures of the emergency escape plan posters on the door in every classroom. There was a picture of a lit cigarette on the bathroom floor, and another picture of some coins on the bathroom floor with a yellow post-it note next to it saying, "Chump change" in all caps. Now this is the weird part. There was a picture of me, taken while I was reading a book in class. From the looks of it, it was my English class that he was not in. There was also a document titled, Rest in Peace 2... but it was empty when I opened it. I still have no idea if this was a joke or not. For all I know, he never showed up again because he realized that he lost his hard drive. This story happened a few years back to me and a friend who I'll call Allie. We're now both 15, making us 12 when this story occurred. Okay, so me and Allie have been friends since 2nd grade, and we would usually spend all weekends and free time together. We always have been into paranormal and ghost stuff. We had every reason to believe that every house we ever went into was haunted. We would go on ghost hunts like the TV shows with a flip phone to record the sounds. But there will always be one night that stands out to me that still haunts me to this day. It was around midnight, and we were hyper and awake like most kids of our age on the weekends. So we decided to do another ghost hunt in my house. We got the flip phone ready, and we borrowed my dad's touchscreen to actually videotape. This was the first and last time we used that. My basement was not like most, because the house I was living in at the time was very old and therefore very old-fashioned. So down the stairs, there's one main big room that we use for storage, and a little further there was another medium-sized room for the washer and the dryer, and the farthest was a small little cell-type room that we never used, mainly because everyone was too creeped out to go in it. Me and Allie walked down the stairs, turned on the camera and flip phone recorder, and we started asking the usual questions you would see on TV, like, is there anybody here? Give me a sign if you're here, and that type of thing. We finally got tired of it and went back upstairs and into my room to be so excited as we reviewed our first video recording. This was a big step for us because we wanted to be ghost hunters so bad. We were watching and we kinda got disappointed as we didn't find anything in the video or voice recording. Usually we would make something up, like a footstep that wasn't ours, to make us feel less bad, but this time we were so excited about the video we didn't even want to make anything up. We couldn't sleep, so we played a few board games, and then we both agreed to review it again because maybe we missed something. And oh boy, we did. While reviewing the tape again, we both could just feel this bad energy coming from it. I guess we didn't realize it before because we were too filled with excitement. We went on anyway, and as we paid more attention, we could actually hear footsteps that weren't ours. Then what showed up on the tape, I still see when I close my eyes. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. The camera was on Allie, and behind her was this figure that looked like a distorted, almost human thing with bright white eyes that almost seemed as if they were watching you through the video. At that point we shut it off, and we were both in complete shock. We couldn't tell my father as he was asleep, being so early in the morning. We both decided to just not tell anybody and keep it our secret. Even though we never went into that basement again, we both still talk and sometimes even dream about it. To this day, I don't know if it was our imagination or if there was something with us in that basement, but I'll never go in there again. So this all happened during Halloween in 2014. My name is Max, and I'm from a small town in Findlay, Ohio. I used to go to a high school at County School about 10 minutes from where I lived called Van Buren High School. Van Buren was a nice little village with good people for the most part, but the only problem was that there were some evil creeps that could be found there if you knew where to look. The biggest hotspot for them to be found was the Van Buren State Park. Everyone knew that the state park had a little infamy to it, as it was known for some rapes and the like. Now, I've been to the park many times with friends and classmates, and nothing bad ever happened to us, so I never thought much of it. I have a lot of good memories of the place actually, like the many times my friends and I would bike the trails and set off the works bombs in the woods or go fishing in the lake. However, fast forward to my senior year at Van Buren on the day of Halloween. My friend Ian and I saw the darker side of Van Buren State Park. The summer before my senior year, I enlisted in the Army National Guard, so it was important that I worked out and stayed in shape. So that day, I asked my best friend Ian if he wanted to go run the trails in the park with me after school, and he said he would, as he likes to work out when he can as well. It was probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I pulled into one of the parking lots, waiting for Ian to meet me there, when I saw this old silver car with a bald and just disturbing man suspiciously sitting in the lot. Knowing that creeps hang out at the parks, I glanced over to check out what he was doing when I noticed he was staring at me and would not take his eyes off of me. It was a very unsettling stare, one that made him look hungry and me uncomfortable. His eyes were wide open, and I'm pretty sure he had a frown, or maybe a grin. We made eye contact, and he nodded at me as if he were trying to say hello, but would not drop his glare. I nodded back but broke eye contact since I was pretty uncomfortable. However, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he was still staring. At this point I had enough, and I sped out of there and pulled out of the parking lot. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw he was following me. This made me floor my gas pedal, and I sped to my high school parking lot where I lost him. I called Ian and told him that I was at the high school, and that he might have to deal with this creep alone. And then my stomach sank. I got a text from Ian saying here. So I made my way back there, and sure enough, right when I pulled in, I saw Ian's car, and 2 spaces away was the scary bald guy in the silver car, still staring. I nodded to Ian for him to follow me in his car to a different parking lot at the park, and we made our way over there. We were safe, or so we thought, and got out of our cars to walk down the hill to check out the trails before we ran them. I don't really like to run with items in my pockets, so we began to walk back up the hill when we saw that old silver car circling in the lot looking for us. At the angle we were at on the hill, he must not have been able to find us, although we could see him. We waited a few minutes before walking up the hill because we figured the 2 of us, who were athletes, could take on this one guy. As we reached the top of the hill, he was gone. Feeling pretty safe, Ian and I decided to still run the trails, but I made sure to grab a rock to use as a weapon for my own peace of mind, in case we would run into the possible rapist or killer in the woods. I'll never know the man's intentions, but given that place's notoriety and his disturbing look, it couldn't have been good. Nowadays I've graduated Van Buren, and I'm an infantryman in the National Guard while attending Bowling Green State University. Sometimes when I go back home to visit, I like to go for drives at night, and sometimes I like to check the state park just to see what monsters lurk there. I'm always armed with a knife, and I'm in good shape, but it still makes me uneasy. I'm sure one of these days I might encounter something like that again. But I'm not stupid or crazy, because as soon as I do, I'm hightailing it out of there once again. So as for anyone else, make sure that if you go camping or hiking at state parks, that you are somehow armed, no self-defense, and never go alone. In my room next to my bed is a big storage closet. It doesn't have a regular door like you would expect. It's a kind of big square door without a knob that just comes off when you grab it by the edges. So rewind to several years ago when I was 19. I remember the first time it happened. I went to sleep and woke up in the morning to find that the door had been opened and was leaning on the wooden edge of my bed. Now this wasn't the strangest thing ever, as it had happened in the past. After all, there were no hinges or anything holding the door in. I pushed the door back into the wall and got ready for school. The next night, I woke up around 4 in the morning. I could have sworn I had woken up to a noise. I sat up and looked around my room in the dark, and noticed the door was leaning on the edge of my bed again. Now I was concerned that the edges to the hole in the wall were starting to chip away, and the door could no longer fit as tightly as it used to. I left it that way overnight and fixed it in the morning. The following night, I was having trouble sleeping. It had to be at least 2 hours of my rolling around bed trying to fall asleep. That's when I heard a huge thump, and I knew what it was. I could even see it in the dark. The door fell open again. I was so done with this. I mentally decided to just leave it open from now on. That's when I heard the slightest movement of a plastic bag from inside of the closet. My heart literally skipped a beat when I heard this. There was no draft in the room at all. I hesitantly flicked on the light switch and looked into the open closet. My biggest fear came true when I saw someone inside the closet peering at me in my bed. Within maybe half a second of my turning on the lights, he tried to hide as if I didn't see him. I couldn't even move. All I could do was scream the word "Dad." I screamed so loud it took my dad maybe 10 seconds to make it to my room. I pointed at the closet and he looked inside. Only then did I finally feel safe to get up and stand behind him. My dad crawled all the way in there, and he couldn't find anyone though. He came out and assured me I was just seeing things, and I started to question that myself. Still, I couldn't sleep in that room. I slept on the floor in my parents' room with a blanket. Well, I wouldn't say slept, as before that could even happen, I heard my bedroom door open from down the hall outside, and then someone literally ran down the stairs and out the front door, slamming it behind them. My parents heard it, and it was only then they believed me. We tried to chase whoever it was down, but he was gone. We later found out he was hiding in an empty container inside the closet. I'm ashamed to admit that my life at one point was so pathetic that I had to resort to using the men seeking women and one-night stand sections of Craigslist, specifically when I was 28. As you'd expect, most of the posts seemed fake or contained images of really fat, gross, or just undesirable women. That is, except for one. There was a posting with a picture of a cute brunette woman saying on the listing, female 26, looking for a quick hookup. No feelings, no relationships, just one night stand. The thing about this photo was that it wasn't a picture of some insanely smoking hot chick. It was just a normal, decent looking woman, making the whole thing more realistic and believable. She left her number on the bottom. I texted her and immediately noticed that she had an iPhone since my iMessage sent a blue bubble. Within seconds, the little gray bubble with the 3 periods popped up, informing me that she was typing. She replied with, "Hi, I'm Jen, but you can call me Jenny." I started to kind of flirt around with her until she gave me her address. As I grabbed my car keys, I didn't know if I should feel excited or ashamed. Minutes later, I arrived to the relatively unlit dead-end block in a rather unappealing area. Second thoughts were popping up now. I shot her a text asking which house she was in. She responded 209, the last house by the dead end. I pulled up to the last house on the street, and sure enough, the little porch light revealed the number 209 stamped onto the house. I'm not gonna lie, it was a shitty looking house. Tiny, single floor, tall grass, and whatnot. I was really doing this. I got out of my car and knocked on her door. There was no answer. Suddenly my phone vibrated. Jenny texted me, telling me to come around back. Why? I asked. The gray bubble indicating she was typing something popped up, then went away. I waited for her to type something, but she didn't. I was a desperate, pathetic man, so against my better judgment, I made my way over to the wooden gate and latched it open. I walked very slowly into the opening of the backyard and froze. I looked up at the windows of the dark house, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw someone staring down at me from one of the top windows. The moment they noticed me, they moved away, and the blinds closed. It must have been Jenny, I was thinking to myself. My phone vibrated. She texted me saying, "I'll be right out, just brushing up." I was shaking now. I don't know if it was because I was nervous about hooking up with a woman for the first time in over a year, or if I was nervous about the weirdness of the situation. I could swear I suddenly heard a stick or something crack from further in the yard. Curiously, I flipped on the flashlight on my iPhone and aimed it over to that corner of the yard. My heart must have flat out stopped for a few moments when I saw what I could swear was an arm moving behind the wooden shed in the corner. I turned off the flashlight and somehow silently left the yard and got back in my car. Before I could shut the door, I heard a window from the house slam open, and a deranged, lunatic-sounding woman who I couldn't see screamed, "Wait, don't go." When I was pulling away from the house, the front door opened, and I heard a loud pop sound. I floored it away from there, and about 5 blocks up, I pulled over and realized I had a flat. They had shot my tire. I tried to get the car as far away from this town as possible before calling roadside service to set up my spare tire. The repair guy found the bullets still in the flat tire. He believed my story and did me a favor of vouching for me in front of a cop. There were 3 people who were arrested, 1 filthy-looking woman and 2 redneck-looking men. They stood trial and were found guilty of God knows what, I don't remember. It's funny, they were too stupid to even evacuate the house after pulling something like that. My mother and stepdad are ranchers. They got a new work truck and put the old one up for sale. A lady from another rural area about 4 hours away was super interested, but gave numerous reasons why she could not even drive halfway to get the truck. My stepdad is nice to a fault, so he convinced my mother to follow in a second vehicle that Saturday so he could drive the truck there. My mom's no fool, and this lady was already making her suspicious. Well, her feelings weren't helped when we arrived and the lady gave a convoluted story about bank problems and presented a post-dated check. She also begged my stepdad to leave the plates in his name. My mom excused herself, grabbed my stepdad, and had a heated argument about taking the check and the plates. She won on canceling the plates, but she lost on the check. So they drove another 4 hours home, and as anyone not my stepdad guessed, the check bounced when it came to the date it was written. The woman dodged phone calls for a while, eventually answering and giving another convoluted story about being in the hospital and on and on. My stepdad for once stood his ground and told her they'd be taking back the truck. So they drove another 4 hours there, this time with a flatbed in case parts were missing or something. No one answered the door at the property, and they found the truck in the shed and loaded it up. My stepdad had tried to keep my mom from saying what was on her mind, but while he was busy securing the load, she wrote something to the effect of, "Thanks for nothing, hope you enjoyed fucking us around," and slipped it under the door. 15 minutes later, as they're driving home, the cell phone rings, and the lady who was supposedly hospitalized was on the line. She said she knows exactly where they lived and that they made a huge mistake. 2 days later, my stepdad awoke to someone climbing into the house through his bedroom window. I heard my mother's screams all the way from my bedroom, which was one of the most chilling moments of my life. It was the crazed woman breaking in, armed with a knife. I don't know how, but my stepdad managed to take her down even while she was armed. The whole story was shared with police, and then the woman was taken away. I guess karma is a pretty amazing thing. This story took place a long time ago, back in 2002, when Craigslist was in its early years. Many wouldn't know, but back in those days, Craigslist was a lot different. It was a lot more so an online garage sale, or just a place where people would list old things that still had some value that they were willing to give away. I got a basketball hoop, a hockey net, and a spoiler for my car, all free in perfect condition in that same year. You'd be lucky if you found something like that these days. Anyway, me and my son were dying to buy a hockey net so we could practice in the cul-de-sac we lived in. For the record, this was before I got that free one I mentioned. Wouldn't you know it, on Craigslist there was an ad for a slightly used regulation-size hockey goal for only $50. It came with a puck and 2 slightly used hockey sticks. I still have a picture of that ad to this day. It seemed like the perfect deal, but he lived about 2 hours away. I called the number he had listed, and he sounded pretty normal on the phone. He had a pretty deep, dark voice, but nothing that would be off-putting. I remember his voice being a bit emotionless. He agreed to meet halfway due to the distance, said he'd put the stuff in the back of his pickup truck. He said he could only come after he got off from work though, which was much later in the day, way past dark. We agreed to meet at some rest stop off the highway. Me and my son, who was 11 at the time, took my wife's minivan, the only car that would be able to fit that huge thing. Within an hour, we were at the truck stop, which was empty at this hour, but was decently lit by 3 big light posts. I parked right under one of the lights and waited. A pickup truck pulled in off the highway right on time. He stopped right in front of me. I went over to his window, but then noticed there was nothing in the back of his truck. "You Steve?" he asked me. "Yep, that's me," I said. "Alright, my buddy's bringing in the stuff with his truck." The guy pulled up behind my car and put it in park. I suddenly had a bad feeling. I told my son to get back in the car and lock every door except mine. 2 more pairs of headlights came off the highway into the lots, surely enough pulling up next to me. And, not surprisingly at this point, there was no hockey equipment in either one of them. My heart was racing. I was worried. Not for me, but for my young son who I for some reason brought with me on this trip. A group of large men mixed with heavy-set and muscular physiques stepped out of the 2 pickup trucks behind the first one. They eyed me from head to toe, giving that typical intimidation stare down. Then this bald guy wearing sunglasses said in a deep voice, "Where's the money?" I instantly pulled out my wallet and handed it to him, begging him to just let me and my son go. He pulled out like $100 and was pissed, expecting more. He then sent 2 of his goons or whatever to get my son. At this point I screamed and begged for him not to take him. One of the men broke the glass to the minivan back door, and I vividly remember the disturbing, heartbreaking screams of my young son. What happened next was what I can only explain to be a miracle from God answering my prayers. A car was entering the lot from off the highway. All the men stopped and turned to look at it. As it got closer, my heart literally dropped in excitement as I saw it was a police car. The lights suddenly began to flash as he got close enough to see what was going on. All of the men were back in their trucks within seconds, speeding off down the highway. Well, at least 2 of them. The truck in the back was caught immediately by the police car, and backup arrived shortly. I explained everything to them, and they got the men that were caught to rat out on the others surprisingly quickly. I guess luckily the guys in the back truck weren't very loyal to whoever their leader was, if they even had any type of leader. Believe it or not, I had a police escort all the way home to make me and my son feel safer. I don't want to get into all the legal stuff, but I'll just say that all of those men except for one was caught, and I'm pretty sure that was the driver of the first pickup truck. Needless to say, my Craigslist days weren't over at that point, but I have always been much more protective of my son and much more cautious of Craigslist meetings since then.
I joined a gym for the first time 3 months ago. Now, a gym is really the last place you'd ever expect something scary to happen. But last week, I had the most horrific experience of my life. I wear one of those wireless headphones when I go to the gym because the wired ones always get in the way and they're just annoying. Sometimes I'll leave my phone on a workout machine when I walk to the water fountain, and when the phone gets too far from the headphones start getting staticky before disconnecting. I only knew because it happened a couple times before when I walked away too far from my phone in the gym. Well, one late night last week, I was one of the last people still in the gym. I was on one of the seated leg machines. I began my set of 20. While I was pushing towards my final reps, the music in my headphones started getting staticky until my headset said, "Disconnected from phone." I stopped my set and reached over to the phone compartment on top of the machine, and I filled with worry when I couldn't feel my phone. It wasn't there. I looked around the gym desperately, thinking someone might have taken it. I only saw 2 other people in the whole gym though, excluding the guy sitting at the front desk. One guy was really fat and sweaty, and the other guy was sitting on one of the machines looking down at his phone. Which one could have taken my phone, if either of them? I had to approach the guy sitting on his phone, as much as I didn't want to. He had earbuds in, so when I approached him, he looked at me with a confused look on his face, as if he didn't want me to be talking to him. He took one earbud out and looked at me, and I firmly asked him, "Did you take my phone?" He looked at me in silence for a couple seconds, then said, "No." There was obvious attitude. I asked him if he saw anyone else walking by recently, and he just shook his head no. For some dumb reason, I said thanks and walked away, when I deep down wanted to tell him to quit being a dick. I went to the front desk and asked the worker to check the video cameras and see once and for all who actually took my phone. As the guy working the front clicked around on his computer, the rude guy who I spoke to walked past me and out the exit. The worker then turned the computer screen so that I could see it, and clicked play on a video, which showed the guy who left 15 seconds ago taking my phone. I thanked the employee and ran to catch the guy who just left, but by the time I got outside, the guy was nowhere to be found. The scary thing that sunk in right away was the fact that I recently disabled my passcode lock to my phone, meaning he had access to all of my apps, all of my texts, pictures, emails, all of my data basically. I went back inside and asked the employee to track that man's membership info, but when he checked the cameras, the guy didn't even check in. He simply walked past the counter unnoticed. So there were no records of this guy even being a member of the gym. The footage showed that he suspiciously walked around between machines, looking around a lot like a nervous person. I asked the employee to report that to the police. He said he'd show it to his boss tomorrow. The next day, I called my best friend Tom so I could tell him why I wouldn't be answering texts for a while, and to also see if he could tell all my other friends what happened. He started freaking out on the phone, begging me to tell him I was kidding about losing my phone. He told me someone had been sending him texts and came to his house. I didn't understand, so he said he'd be over to show me. 10 minutes later, Tom got to my house and showed me a long conversation between him and someone using my phone pretending to be me. It started out with the person on my phone saying, "Hey, can I stay at your place tonight? I got in a huge fight with my parents." Tom said, "Yeah, let me know when you come over." Then the guy who was using my phone said, "Can you just leave your back door open? I'm gonna be over super late and I don't want to wake you." The conversation went on a little while longer before Tom finally agreed to just leave his back door unlocked. Tom went back to sleep under the impression that it was actually me who would be coming through that back door. When we finished reading the conversation, Tom looked up at me and said, "The cameras." We rushed to his house together and watched the footage captured on the cameras throughout his house. I was disturbed, but also not surprised, to see that man from the gym who took my phone walking in through the back door of Tom's house. He scavenges the place, grabbing expensive household objects and throwing them in his pockets. He moves from the den to the kitchen and eventually to the upstairs. I saw the fear in Tom's face when he watched the man on the camera in the upstairs hallway open his bedroom door, step in for about 20 seconds, and come back out, leaving the door open. The man was in the house for about 10 minutes before sneaking back out the back door. It looked like he took a lot of valuables. Tom and I sent the video footage to the police, and when I went back to the gym, the manager told me she'd be sending their footage as well. 3 months later, not a word from the police, so whoever stole my phone and snuck into Tom's house got away with it scot-free. I currently go to a 24-hour gym in my town. It's usually on the quieter side most of the day, but during the night hours it really becomes a ghost town. I don't quite understand how they could afford to stay open 24/7. I had to work late one night to cover for someone else's shift, so I got off work at 11 p.m. I planned on heading right over to the gym to get a quick midnight workout in. When I got there, nobody else was there. I was the only one working out. Well, only for about 10 minutes, until I finally spotted someone else working out. It made me feel a little less odd for being there so late. The guy was wearing a beanie and a hoodie. I was sweating just looking at him, to be honest. I mean, yeah, it was cold out, but it wasn't cold in the gym. I barely had enough time to analyze his odd clothing decision before he started staring me down. I looked back for as long as I felt comfortable before deciding to look away. I felt like he seemed to be challenging my dominance because I still felt his stare through my peripheral vision. I kept shooting brief looks back at him to still find him staring at me. I tried my best to ignore it and went on with my workout. I just couldn't take the staring anymore though. So I went to a different section of the gym where there was absolutely no one around. I was finally able to work out in peace. I was doing bicep curls by the free weights while facing the mirror. That's when I noticed it. That guy in the beanie was hiding behind one of the chest press machines. There was a slight opening between the lifting mechanism and the actual weights on the machine, and through that opening was the guy's face, once again staring at me. I think when he realized that I noticed him, he moved away out of sight behind the machine. I'm way too timid a person to go approach anybody like that, so instead of confronting him, I put the weights down and left the room. I walked straight to the front desk and asked the girl working to tell the man to either stop staring at me like that or to leave the gym. She looked down the aisle of workout machines and saw nobody. I asked her to come follow me. She was clearly very reluctant to do so, but she ended up coming with me to the back room. We looked around the room, but he wasn't in there. In fact, it seemed like he wasn't even in the gym anymore. I apologized and told her to keep an eye out for the man in the beanie. She walked back to her desk, and I kept working out for another 10 to 15 minutes. I waved goodbye to the girl as I left the gym and went to my car. As I put the key in the door lock, I heard manic footsteps hitting the concrete. I was confused at first. It sounded like somebody running in my direction. I turned 180 degrees. Someone was sprinting towards me from the dark. I stood like an animal frozen in headlights for a second as I stared in shock. When the person emerged into the circle of light under the light post I was parked under, I was able to instantly recognize the guy in the beanie and hoodie from earlier. I opened the car door and jumped inside, slamming it shut behind me. I slammed my hand down on that tiny lock knob atop the door handle a split second before the man tried to open the door. As I started the car, he started to kick at my door and window. I threw the handle into reverse and stepped on the gas. The car jolted backwards away from the man, and I was able to escape the parking lot safely. I got home and found a bunch of dents in my door from the man's kicks. Admittedly, I should have called the cops, or even the gym, and warned the girl of the man now that she was alone. Instead, I selfishly just went to bed and told myself I would never go to the gym late at night again. I used to work nights at a 24-hour fitness in New Jersey. I had a love-hate relationship with these shifts. I loved it because very few people would come in during the deep night hours, meaning less people checking in and less weights I had to re-rack. I hated it because it meant I had to spend the graveyard hours sitting at a desk doing nothing while everybody else was asleep. Still, maybe you would think many strange things would happen during these hours. Or maybe you wouldn't. It's a gym, what could happen? Actually, only one strange incident ever happened while I was there. I was sitting in a chair behind the counter reading a magazine. Then, out of natural curiosity, I turned to do a little people watching. Well, I guess you would call it person watching, because there was only one guy in the gym. He wasn't doing anything though. He was kind of just pacing slowly down the gym, looking around. There's a cutoff between two different sections of the gym, the front and the back. He made a left turn past the wall that separated the two sections, and then he disappeared from my view. So it was back to reading for me. 10 minutes passed and I forgot the guy was even there. Then suddenly everything went dark and silent. Like literally, the power in the gym just shut out. All the lights turned off and all the music went dead. It was so dark I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me. Thank God our phones have flashlights these days, otherwise I wouldn't have known what to do. I turned it on and tried to think of what I should do next. I knew some kind of power box was in one of the storage rooms connected to the back section of the gym. I also knew that's exactly where the one guy working out happened to be. On my way there, phone/flashlight in hand, I called out for the patron over and over. Now I was in the back section, still calling for him. Why on earth would he not answer me? There was something so eerie about being in a silent, pitch-black gym and seeing all the workout equipment only through a flashlight. I found the power box in the back storage area, or I guess what I thought was the power box. I tried flicking on and off every possible combination of switches, but the power did not come back on. Since I couldn't figure it out, I guessed it was on me to close up shop and wait for Kathy, the owner, to come fix it tomorrow morning. But first I had to find that guy. I did a thorough scan of the whole back section. Behind all the equipment and all the janitorial closets, nothing. The only other place I could check back there was the women's bathroom. I opened the door and called for him once more. My voice echoed into the seemingly empty bathroom. Still, I had to double check to confirm. I made sure to point the flashlight in every possible direction so I could see every inch of the bathroom. The only place to check now were the stalls. Before I could open either of them though, I started to hear noises. Breathing noises. Like sickly, deranged breathing noises. I had my hand on the door, ready to push it open, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I said, "Are you in there?" No answer. I got on my knees and looked under the stall door with my flashlight. There were two legs standing right behind the stall door, practically inches from my face. He was literally standing on the other side of the stall door. I quickly got up and left the bathroom, heart racing. I ran to the front desk and tried to figure out what to do. I tried calling the owner, aka my boss, but obviously she was asleep by this time. I left 2 different voicemails on her phone. The only other thing I could think to do was call the cops, and so I did. I didn't know what else to say other than there was a suspicious man in our gym and I was 90% sure he somehow cut the power. I hung up the phone and felt alone and horrified in the darkness and silence. Suddenly, a metallic hit sound came from across the dark gym, like one of the machine's weights being dropped. I shined the light down the gym and called for the patron once more, and then called out that we're closed and that he had to leave. Then I think I saw him. I saw someone walking between 2 machines before getting too far from the light to see. It seemed like he was messing with me now. I shined the light in the direction that he was walking, and I swear to God, it looked like just at the edge of the light, there was a face looking at me. The blue and red lights from the cop car outside lit up the front section of the gym briefly. A cop knocked on the now dysfunctional front door, and I physically opened it to let him in. He took out his flashlight, greeted me, and said he'd take a look around. All I saw from the front desk was the light of the officer patrolling the whole entire gym, including bathrooms and closets, before coming back to me and saying it's empty. He suggested that whoever it was left through the back door, and that I should lock up and come back tomorrow morning. And that's exactly what I did. By the time I got back the next morning to check on things, Kathy was already there. Apparently it was just a simple power outage the night previous. Kathy and I checked the camera footage together in those brief moments before the power went out. We checked for the guy I described, but he wasn't there. There was no footage of him entering the gym, there was no footage of him working out, or even just walking around the gym. Kathy looked at me like I was a loon, but I was too frozen with shock and confusion to care. I swore up and down to her that someone was there that night. To this day, I don't know if she believed me. I don't even know what to think of that night, but I know I saw someone there that night, regardless of what the cameras might have shown. For my friend Ryan's 21st birthday, I threw him a surprise party at my house. I invited all of our friends in our group, plus some acquaintances and friends of friends who were brought along. My parents weren't home for the night, so it worked out nicely. The peak of the night was when Ryan walked in the door and all of us got to scream surprise. It was a Friday night, so mostly everyone drank a decent amount. I tried not to get too drunk, just so I could stay alert in case anyone was doing something dumb in my parents' house. We had cake and other desserts set up for Ryan too. I did a lot of walking around offering cake and beers to everyone, even people I'd never met before, including one guy with long blonde hair and a football shirt sitting on my couch, and some dude who looked a few years older sitting on my grandma's old rocking chair that she gave to my mom. I whispered into Ryan's ear at some point that half these random dudes that our friends brought over looked either kind of creepy or odd. He agreed with me, a bit over-enthusiastically, but that's probably because he was a lot drunker than I was. The night progressed and everyone got drunker, and everyone was doing increasingly silly and dumb things. The guy who was still in the rocking chair started to hum a song really loudly and obnoxiously. The rest of us just watched and found it hilarious for some reason. Then the guy with the long blonde hair started to sing a completely different song, and everyone else kind of just joined along. It was a room full of drunk 20-something-year-olds singing very loudly. It was a fun time, but eventually it had to end, and people started leaving one by one as they sobered up. A couple of people stayed the night because they were too drunk to drive, including Ryan and our friend Sean. I slept in the living room with them. We left the TV on, with the movie The Hangover on in the background. I suddenly thought to ask the two, who were those two guys who had been in the living room on the couch and in the rocking chair most of the night? Sean said the guy with the long blonde hair was a friend of one of our other friends, but as far as the guy in the rocking chair, neither of them had a clue. I decided to text everyone in the group chat we had made prior to the surprise party to find out who was friends with this creepy dude in the rocking chair. One by one, our friends said they had no idea. It seemed everyone assumed he knew someone there, but apparently that wasn't the case. I was waiting on two more friends to answer, but I was pretty sure one of them had to have known him. Anyway, Sean and Ryan fell asleep quickly, so I decided to go to sleep too. I woke up an hour later though, I guess to the sound of the TV. I checked my phone, which was sitting on my chest. There were a bunch of texts from the group chat. To put it short, every single person in the group chat said they had no idea who that was. I sat up to let that sink in better. Some random, creepy-looking older dude snuck into my house and hid in plain sight for hours. I suddenly looked around the living room, lit up by the glow of the TV. I felt as if my entire house was unsafe and that we weren't alone. I quietly stepped out from the living room towards the kitchen. I went over to the tiny hall that separates the kitchen from the 3 bedrooms on the first floor, still using the glow from the TV in the living room as my light source to navigate. I think because I didn't want to draw attention, I guess. I stepped into the hall and froze. I was pretty sure I could see something at the end of the hall. It was too dark though. I took a couple steps forward, and it became more clear that there was a person standing there at the end of the hall. Then to make it even worse, I heard a faint, low, cackling kind of laugh at the far end of the hall. I slowly backed away without acting fazed at all. Meanwhile, I felt like my heart dropped to my stomach. I got back to the living room and shook my 2 friends awake. I whispered to them that someone was in the house with us. I got on the phone with the police and talked as low as I could into the phone so that the woman on the other end could still hear me. And as I was on the phone, I saw the creepy guy from earlier, the guy who was on the rocking chair all night, suddenly walk out to the living room, look at us sitting there, passed us, and walked out the front door. I was literally frozen. I think my friends were too. I told the 911 operator that the intruder just left my house. She said lock all the doors and we should be fine. A cop came by for a few minutes just to check in. After he left, my friends and I found a trail of blood stains on the carpet in the hallway. The stains led to the end of the hall, where I saw him standing. Then it just stopped. Needless to say, no sleep was had that night. I'm sure we all have those memories from our childhood that make us uncomfortable to think about. How we were so young and innocent and unknowing to something bad that was about to happen. I was in the 1st grade. It was either a Friday or Saturday night. All I know is we didn't have school the next day. My friend's mom set up a little party for his birthday at a local bowling alley. All his friends and their parents were there, and we were sectioned off into different lanes to play with different groups. I wasn't having a lot of fun, mainly because I stunk at bowling, and still do to this day. I remember complaining and crying to my mom that I didn't want to play anymore, and I think one of the kids started taking my turn for me. There was a back room sectioned off for the party with a bunch of snacks, sweets, and sodas. So while my mom was talking to some of the other parents, I think that's when I snuck to that back room to fill my stomach with cupcakes and other sweets. There was a door leading to the outside in this room. It led to the back of the building, I guess. And the next thing I remember was the moment a man was standing at the doorway telling me to come outside and check something out. To this day, it still makes me cringe, thinking back and remembering that I actually listened to the random man and went out there. Upon stepping outside, the man knelt down to my level so that we were face to face. Then he pointed at a truck that was running, maybe 5 yards away. I remember he said he had the rest of the sweets and snacks in the back of his truck, and he needed help unloading it. He also offered to give me a $20 reward if I helped him. Now, I'm sure in my 6-year-old mindset, I was thinking about how cool I'd look, and how jealous all the other kids would be. I followed the man to his truck. He opened the back door for me, and pointed at a big black plastic bag sitting in his back seat. I climbed into the truck, and the next thing I remember was the horrific, ear-piercing scream of a woman. It was my mom, standing at the back doorway of the bowling alley, screaming my name over and over. I ran to my mom, who grabbed me and held me tight as I heard the sound of tires skidding out, followed by a truck speeding away. I turned to look, and the truck was already gone. My mom was in tears, scolding me. A few other parents and kids came out, and it turned into a huge scene. It was a traumatizingly embarrassing experience for me. The bowling alley had to shut operations for the night, and the party had to be cut short. I've asked my mom about this story so many times. She said the police arrived after my dad picked me up, and my mom told the police everything I told her. She also got a decent look at the man and his truck, so she gave a description to the police as well. Unfortunately, nothing was ever heard as far as the police catching him. All I have to say is, if any of you are parents, burn the phrase "don't talk to strangers" into your kids' heads. For my son's 12th birthday, my wife and I threw him a little party in the backyard. We invited the whole family, as we usually did for any of our kids' birthdays, and let him invite all of his friends too. We live in rural New Jersey, so our backyard connects to forest on 2 sides. We also have a pretty big property, which allowed us to space out a bunch of tables on the grass with food and refreshments. The little party went into the night. Most of our guests left, but closer family and some of our friends stayed late. It was probably 8 o'clock. The mosquitoes were out in full force, so I decided to run over to the shed at the far end of the backyard by the woods to fetch the tiki torches. I grabbed like 6 torches and set them on the grass while I went back in to look for fuel. However, while I was in the shed, I heard steps in the woods. I stopped what I was doing to take a look out there, but honestly it was just too dark to see out into the woods. After finding the fuel, I went back to the part of the yard everyone else was at and pitched the torches into the ground. The 6 torches gave off a decent amount of light while keeping us safe from the blood-sucking pests. There were about 6 kids left, including my son, and they all wanted to play hide-and-seek in the woods. My wife and I allowed it, just making sure to tell them to stay close to the tree line. My son and his friends went to play their little game in the woods, which left the rest of us to sit in peace for a little bit. It was a solid 15 minutes of talking with relatives and hearing the kids laughing and yelling in the near distance out in the woods. But all of a sudden, the yelling turned to screams, concerning-sounding screams from the kids. All of us looked at each other, sitting up in concern. The kids one by one came running out of the woods, yelling that there's something in there. We don't have bears or any big predatory animals around here, so that was not the first thing we assumed it to be. I told all the kids to stay near the patio area. My brother Dom and I, being the biggest men there, decided to go investigate. We took a couple flashlights and off we went into the pitch-black woods. The only sounds we heard around us were crickets and other night bugs. So we went deeper, and that's when we started to hear something else. It sounded like an animal at first, but as we followed the sound to get closer, the sound started to become more human-like. We continued to walk, and we agreed we both had the feeling that we were being watched, like stalked. I put my arm out to stop Dom. Standing in the silence now, the best way I could describe the sound we were hearing was a moaning, angry kind of sound. It sounded human, but it was a bizarre sound. Then, a few cracks of the leaves on the ground ahead of us. We aimed our lights over there, and there was someone or something behind the tree. The moaning sound stopped. Dom stepped forward and called out. What happened next was textbook horror movie stuff. A scream, so loud, so blood-curdling, so inhuman, filled the air. I'm sure it could be heard for miles. Dom and I turned and booked it back to the property. We waved at everyone to go inside when we made it back. Dom got on the phone with the sheriff's department. They said it was probably a wild animal. We wanted to insist it was a human, but we honestly couldn't. We to this day don't know who or what we saw and heard in those woods, but it was definitely stalking us and the kids when they were playing hide and seek. And that scream we heard, it just didn't sound human to us.